the laziest Kryptonian in the Marvel Universe. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction, so don't try any techniques you hear here in real life. Your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 151. Reed Richards. Having lost their homeworld, the Diburi's last fleet dispersed, seeking an opportunity to revive their people. This warship, tracking that cosmic energy, saw a unique opportunity. Naturally, the Diburi aboard would not let this opportunity slip, even if it meant turning the culprit into the hope of their entire race. Wu Kei immediately inquired, "Science officer, what is the surface environment like? What's the threat rating?" The officer reported, "The surface climate of this planet is somewhat harsh for the Diburi, but it's still possible to survive without relying on environmental adaptations. If we use our mimicry abilities to disguise ourselves as natives, our soldiers' physical fitness will only be slightly reduced compared to their peak, fully armed form. The natives of this planet still belong to planetary civilization, and the spacecraft we observed previously is still quite backward. Based on their appearance, we suspect they lack leapfrog capabilities. Based on these criteria, this planet is considered low threat. While this region of space is Kree territory, it's a border zone, and there are no signs of Kree warship activity nearby." "Very good." Wu Kei stood up and ordered everyone, "The infiltration operation will now begin. I will personally lead the team and serve as the commander of the infiltration force. The Marines will use single-person landing capsules, carry no weapons, and wear biochemical mimicry armor suitable for land combat. After landing on the surface, their primary mission will be to mimic the planet's natives. The rest of the troops will be organized into ground support forces and surface attack forces. They will await my command to act at any time. The operational objective is to identify target natives absorbing cosmic energy and seize this energy. Covert operations will be the primary focus." "Yes, sir." Following the spectacular near-Earth solar flare a few days ago, Earth was greeted by another meteor shower. This time, no matter where the astronomers came from, they couldn't pinpoint the source of the shower. Meanwhile, on a suburban highway in New York State, a car sped along. Reed Richards, the Marvel Universe's top genius and wandering doctoral student, was driving. On the passenger seat lay a sheet of fax paper, densely packed with observation data. A few days ago, all observatory data from the solar flare had been sealed by the government, citing confidentiality. By the time Reed, a step behind schedule, piqued his curiosity, he'd found nothing to study. That was until a brief report from Hank McCoy, the X-Men's logistics officer and a rare bright figure among the dumb mutants, sent over a brief report. Reed saw an opportunity. So he hurried to the X-Men's base, the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. Hank had told him the location was private and confidential, but Reed didn't care. He just wanted to study the solar flare the government was talking about. "Just look at this ridiculous solar flare." The car pulled into a manor filled with children and teenagers. For a moment, Reed thought he'd arrived at the wrong place. This wasn't an X-Men base. But there was a sign at the gate that read Junior School, so the site was perfectly normal. At the front door, Hank McCoy, the man he'd met, was waiting. Reed parked the car in the open space in front of the main entrance, got out, and greeted, "Mr. McCoy, long time no see, Dr. Richards, I didn't expect you to come. I'm simply interested in the truth behind the government's claims about the solar flare," Reed Richards confessed. "Of course, that's exactly what we'd like to hear from you. Please follow me." Hank, after exchanging pleasantries, immediately led the group inside the mansion. The house on the surface was a manor house built by the Xavier family, dating back to the Civil War era, or even earlier. It has been extended and continued through successive generations. Although it was completely destroyed in 1973, it has been rebuilt to its original form. Its grandeur rivals even the mansions of European nobles. Since Charles Xavier, also known as Professor X, donated it for use as a mutant school, it has been renovated several times with the help of mutants. Although not visible from the surface, the underground space is quite large and modern. However, Reed paid no attention to this traditional beauty. He spent the entire journey questioning Hank about their mission to rescue the Space Shuttle Endeavour. He focused on the direct, up-close experiences of the X-fighters after the solar flare. Such experiences, beyond the data itself, could potentially influence their ultimate judgment. Without hearing the individuals involved and asking them directly, it's difficult to fully grasp the situation. Reed followed Hank to the laboratory area next to the underground hangar. Here were displayed a number of finished and semi-finished devices developed by Hank, which would be used by the X-Men in the future. Reed Richards glanced at them briefly, dismissing them as unsophisticated, and lost interest in further investigation. The two of them approached a personal computer, slightly more advanced than those found outside. On its large, CRT screen, data reports in green text were displayed. Several other screens displayed footage from the X-fighters from various angles. Hank explained the situation while Red reviewed the data. After just a few attempts, Reed became familiar with this X-Men developed system and mastered its operation. The first-hand data recorded from the X-fighter regarding the solar flare was incredibly detailed. As a rare scientific leader among the mutants, Hank McCoy's sensitivity to data collection and recording far surpassed that of the other X-Men. No one knew when these items would be useful. Even if they sat unused most of the time, they couldn't be left without them when needed. This was Hank's philosophy and approach. Furthermore, he had built the X-fighters himself, so who would resist installing some sensors on them? And when they were needed, this data proved invaluable. At least from the data, from the temperature to the recorded radio frequency, Reed could confidently say that this was definitely not a solar flare, but cosmic radiation could be a possibility. Further research was needed to determine how this high-energy, high-level cosmic radiation was generated, how it was absorbed, and what effects it might have. But Reed Richards' attention was riveted by the documentary footage on the X-Men's exterior. He paused and played, then rewound the tape. Hank, noticing Reed's actions, asked, puzzled, "What's wrong?" He asked because Reed's focus wasn't on the pseudo-solar flare image, but on the inky blackness of space. Reed Richards pointed to a section of the paused screen and replied, "Don't you think this part of the video looks strange? It's like something's hidden." Hank studied the screen carefully and adjusted the knobs to play the footage correctly. The footage on the X-Men wasn't recorded on VHS tape, but on 8mm film. This not only made the content clearer, but also eliminated noise when paused. However, it could sometimes stop midway between frames, requiring some adjustment. Even after some minor adjustments, Hank still couldn't make out what was going on. He asked honestly, "Is there something wrong with this picture? The starlight, the brightness of the starlight is abnormal. And the position of the stars is also wrong," Reed replied. Chapter 152 Alien Warship Appears. After removing the film from the machine, Reed asked, "Do you have a darkroom for developing photos?" "Yes," Hank pointed to a corner of the lab. There was a room with a heavy black curtain hanging from the doorway. Reed held the light, confirmed his target image, and marked it with a sticky note. He asked, "What kind of developer do you use here? C41 or RAW4?" "C41, Hank replied. "Do you mix your own developer, Codax 2, so do you have ammonium thiosulfate, sodium acetate, sodium bisulfite, ammonium sulfate, aluminum sulfate, and boric acid? You mix your own developer?" Hank asked. "To bring out the different color blocks, you have to adjust the developer formula. Besides, the company's standard developer is only suitable for developing ordinary landscape photos. It's not very suitable for space photos, and it tends to lose a lot of the key points." With that, Hank worked with Reed, prepared some materials, and entered the darkroom. Although they needed to develop film, not standard camera negatives, both the men were skilled researchers with manual skills, certainly not the type to be incompetent without standard tools. So, if they needed any tools or stands, they would make do with clips or rubber bands if they didn't already have them. After a lot of fiddling, they finally developed the photo in question. Once the photo was fully developed, rinsed, and drained, Hank was stunned. "What is this?" he asked. He saw a strange, spindle-shaped artifact in the photo, obscuring a small area of the starry sky. Not only did it blend seamlessly into the background, but the reflections from the object could be mistaken for starlight. This was why it was barely visible in normal video playback. Only through specialized development could this feature be highlighted. This was similar to the future of Photoshop techniques, where filters, contrast, and other adjustments can be used to emphasize different aspects of an image. The two men left the darkroom. Reed used a magnifying glass to study the unidentified object in the photo and said, I reasonably suspect that when you were on your mission to rescue the Endeavor, there was a third aircraft in outer space, in addition to the Endeavor and the X-Men's fighters. Based on the image, I estimate this aircraft to be approximately 2 to 3 kilometers away from you. It's approximately 600 to 800 meters long, 60 to 100 meters wide, and 120 to 140 meters tall. There are no clear reference coordinates, so the data is estimated. But its relative position to you hasn't changed much. So I suspect this aircraft observed your mission from beginning to end without interfering. You, Hank swallowed and asked, who do you think this aircraft belongs to? The Red Empire, Reed said bluntly. If the Red Empire could build something like this, they wouldn't have disintegrated. It could only be aliens. Aliens, the term had shaken Hank McCoy's fragile heart several times recently. His immediate thought was the man who had saved Raven and defeated the X-Men, though not in a serious fight. Hank asked, what do you think these aliens' purposes? Reed, finding the answer uninteresting, placed the photo on the platform and let Hank approach to examine it. He replied, I suspect there are several possibilities. First, that cosmic radiation, not a solar flare, is some kind of weapon or experimental weapon these aliens have. They're hiding to observe the results. Second, the aliens are here to observe Earth's spacecraft and assess our technological capabilities. What they'll do after that assessment is hard to guess. Those are the possibilities. Third, they just happen to be passing by. They saw something interesting, so they stopped to observe. They didn't lose anything, and they didn't interfere with your operations. If I hadn't warned you, you wouldn't have noticed. Hank felt a little aggrieved by Reed's criticism. The X-Jet Blackbird, a fusion of cutting-edge technology, boasted a radar superior to other aircraft of the era, but its primary target was Earth-developed aircraft. There was no mention of detecting alien aircraft. Furthermore, the Blackbird already had radar stealth capabilities, while optical stealth was still under development. How could alien aircraft lack such technology? The fact that he couldn't detect the aircraft in standard external footage indirectly demonstrated the stealth capabilities of alien technology. Unlike Reed Richards, who focused his attention on the unique cosmic radiation, Hank was more focused on the potential impact of this unknown spacecraft. Alien invasions have always been a favorite theme in science fiction. But even in a world with mutants, superheroes, and various other worldly creatures from legends and myths, no one had considered the possibility of alien intervention. So, what were their goals? Until confirmed, it was difficult to guarantee that they were completely unrelated to the cosmic radiation. And what about Jean, who absorbed the radiation? What role would she play in this? Resisting the urge to immediately inform Charles and Raven, Hank continued to study the cosmic radiation data with Reed. While the screen was filled with raw data, including data and time, neither of them were ordinary scientists. They needed to translate the data into more intuitive graphs to understand it. A typical person might try to cross-convert different groups of data into various graphs, trying to see if any of them could tell a story, the so-called reasonable explanation, but Reed Richards and Hank McCoy could do this work directly in their heads. Those obviously meaningless groupings and explanations were simply discarded. During the discussion, a sudden inspiration struck Reed. What's your visualization tool? He asked. Yes, I designed it myself. How do you want to do it? Hank asked. You designed it yourself. That's fine. Reed left his seat, let Hank take his seat, and began to explain how he wanted to convert the data into graphs and then print them out. After discussing several conversion methods and images, and printing out 4 or 5 images on a noisy dot matrix printer, Reed stacked them and held them up to the light. Even Hank, who had previously been oblivious, noticed something was amiss. The overlapping images showed a pattern. Such a pattern couldn't possibly occur with a solar flare. Or, even if it did, it would be over a very long period, spanning days, weeks, or months. Reed's time frame was a mere 10 minutes. Within that span, the overlapping images displayed a pattern repeated dozens of times. Hank exclaimed in horror, could this thing be alive? I don't know, Reed asked. Can you give me a copy of the complete data? I'll use my equipment when I get back and perhaps I can uncover more information. After a moment's thought, Hank replied, the data cannot be leaked to anyone except you. And we also want to know your research results. Do you agree to this condition? Yes. Chapter 153 Mutant Refugee Home. Genosha is an island located off the southeastern coast of Africa, northeast of Madagascar, and southwest of the Seychelles. It's a refugee homeland established by mutants with the tacit consent of the United States and governed by Magneto, Eric Lensher. The mutants on the island are self-sufficient and live a simple life. While the world appears to be relatively tolerant of mutants, allowing them to live and work alongside one another, some still struggle to fit in. They may have been harmed by humans, or have harmed other humans. Even worse, they have both harmed and been harmed. These mutants seek refuge on Genosha, where their fellow mutants treat one another with greater tolerance. Some, though perhaps with a criminal past, can live peacefully. However, not all mutants with criminal records are welcome on the island. As the leader of the Brotherhood of Mutants, Eric doesn't accept just any scum. This is especially true of criminals who don't share the ideals of home and simply seek shelter. Therefore, Genosha is neither a paradise nor a true mutant nation. It's simply a last-ditch refuge for a group of refugees who haven't been accepted by the world. Of course, its establishment was a complex undertaking. It involved the tacit approval of the United States and the U.S. military, the underhanded efforts of the X-Men, and the desire to create a vulnerability for Magneto, thereby trapping this exceptionally capable and charismatic mutant leader. Otherwise, during the Brotherhood's most active period, the mutants led by Magneto would have been like rats in a ditch, nowhere to be found. Unlike now, with a base openly and publicly visible, Magneto would be vulnerable to interference from other forces should he attempt to maintain this refuge. Since the X-Men's efforts in establishing this refuge were merely under the table, their public interactions were naturally minimal, creating unnecessary speculation. At least the X-Men haven't openly sent supplies here. They themselves, with their ongoing efforts at the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, might not have the resources to support a refuge housing thousands of people. But today, an X-jet made a rare landing at Hammer Bay, the capital of Genosha. It wasn't so much the capital as it was Magneto's permanent residence, rather than some other gathering point. Because the X-Fighters were so conspicuous, those on board didn't even need to notify the X-Men themselves. Eric had already arrived, furious, awaiting the arrival of the X-Men. Scott, dressed in civilian clothes, was the only one to arrive on Genosha to gather information. The sight of the two rows of men behind Eric, coupled with the two American Black Hawk helicopters lying sideways not far away, their smoke still lingering, gave Scott a bad feeling. "What are you doing here? What trouble are you planning to cause this land?" Eric demanded sharply. "Eric, I'm just looking for Jean," Scott stated bluntly. "You saw what he did, but did you see his men? He left before you arrived." "I'm glad the X-Men are late again," Eric quipped. Looking at the mess, Scott cursed, "Damn it," and began to head back to the X-Fighters. Eric shouted from behind, "Stop. You owe me an explanation." "I'm busy, Eric. I need to find Jean. Your lack of time is your business." "Do you think that wrecked piece of metal can take off without my permission?" Eric threatened, then voiced his suspicions. "I may not have Charles's abilities, but I can tell Jean is hiding something from me. Those soldiers were the same way, asking me if I didn't already know. It's a shame they fled, without saying anything they should have. So, you better tell me what I need to know. Tell me what happened here first," Scott said. Although Eric didn't shout, his gaze, his lowered voice, was equally intimidating. "I'm not bargaining with you, kid," he said. "Tell me, or I'll find the answers my own way." Cyclops is not yet the second-generation leader of mutants who will become a great man in the future. Compared to ordinary people, he is at best a young man who graduated from college not long ago, joined the army and was stationed overseas, and fought in several tough battles. Facing the pressure from the first-generation mutant leader Magneto, although he did not show any fear, he still told the story of the Battle of Red Hook. This was considered a surrender in his heart. Eric certainly did not care about the cause and effect of the battle. He only cared about the two injured mutants. He asked, what happened to Raven and Pete? At this time, Eric and Pete, the father and son, had not yet recognized each other. Only Pete knew about this relationship. So Eric's focus was still on Mystique and Raven, his former comrades. They're all fine. Pete has multiple fractures. Raven has organ failure due to the huge force. But Hank has tried his best to rescue her, and her life is not in danger, Eric said disdainfully. Two people are seriously injured, and you call it okay? I really doubt what Charles taught you. If no one died, it wouldn't be a big deal. Scott, who was about to say this, was interrupted. He was embarrassed and couldn't say it out loud. He had to change the subject and asked, What happened here? Why did Jean run away again? He waved his hand to let others step back and do their own things. Eric explained, Jin ran here to seek refuge yesterday. I asked why, and even though he didn't say it, I still took him in. Today it's the turn of the US military to come and ask for people. In fact, as long as he didn't show up, things would never have come to this point. Who knew he would take the initiative to jump out and cause this big battle? Now that I think about it, it was when those soldiers were about to tell me what happened to Jean that he jumped out and beat them away. Judging from his behavior, he might have intended to kill people. If I hadn't stopped them, none of those soldiers would have gotten away. After the battle, even if he wanted to stay, I couldn't have kept him. He understood the situation, so Jean left on her own. Scott was quick to react. He immediately thought of a possibility and said, maybe Jean didn't know that Raven was fine and thought I killed her, so she didn't dare tell you or stay. I knew it wasn't that she didn't care about us, she just couldn't control herself. Raven wasn't fine, Eric said darkly. Looking at this love-stricken boy, who was willing to say anything to excuse his girlfriend, Eric felt he needed to teach him about the dangers of society. Chapter 154 New York Continental Hotel. Nightcrawler Kurt Wagner followed Storm Ororo Monroe through the streets of New York City. Aside from his white hair, Ororo didn't have many distinctive mutant features. So, he simply wore regular clothes, like a normal girl, and tied his hair up with a rubber band to keep it from flying. But Kurt's mutant features were quite obvious. His tail was easy to hide, but his blue skin and fur were impossible to conceal. So, Kurt had to endure the scorching heat, wearing a trench coat and a wide-brimmed gentleman's hat, pulling it down to cover his face as much as possible. The world seemed to accept mutants. But the inner thoughts of ordinary people, and the vague gazes mutants felt walking down the street, suggested this acceptance was merely a passing sentiment, not a genuine commitment. Kurt wasn't used to walking down the street and being the subject of public scrutiny. It made him feel like a monkey in a zoo. However, Kurt had never been to the place Ororo was taking him to, and he'd heard it wasn't very welcoming to mutants using their powers to invade. So, walking was the safest option. Their destination was in downtown Manhattan, at a Y-shaped intersection. Ororo was headed to a triangular hotel at the corner of two streets. The waiter at the door was black, wearing a red uniform with yellow lines. But as Ororo passed by and raised his hat in greeting, Kurt noticed shark-like eel slits on the boy's head. His eyes suddenly rolled back to black, then immediately returned to normal. He seemed to be a mutant, too. Inside the hotel, there were several people sitting scattered around the lobby. Some were reading newspapers, some were resting, and one was disassembling and cleaning his gun while sipping coffee. Ororo walked to the counter and placed a special gold coin directly on the table. Karen, the black concierge and lobby manager, looked up, took in the person, and offered a polite smile. Ms. Monroe, long time no see. How can I help you? Notify us when there's any news of Jean Grey's whereabouts. You should know the phone number. He placed two fingers together, pressing the gold coin and gently moving it toward himself. Karen said, it's my honor to serve you. Did you know that Miss Grey appeared on Genosha Island this morning, defeated a U.S. Army task force, and then disappeared? Ororo frowned. A message about missing someone doesn't count, you understand. Of course, I'm well aware of your request. That message was a gift, Karen said politely, his smile concealing his teeth. Storm, seeing the request successfully issued, was about to leave when Karen called her back. Ms. Monroe, we have a number of jobs suitable for you. Have you considered earning some extra income? He said, pulling a sheaf of papers from under the counter. Ororo paused, glanced back, and said, I have something urgent to deal with. I'll come back once I'm done. You guys aren't in a hurry, are you? Of course not. Placing the letter of authorization back under the counter, Karen smiled, his teeth flashing. Then I'll be at your service anytime. As Kurt followed Ororo out the door, Kurt, who had previously held his breath, finally breathed a sigh of relief. Ororo, where's this place? It feels very dangerous inside the Continental Hotel. Don't cause trouble here. The professor's reputation won't be easily lost. I'll handle the liaisons here. I'm just on my way here. I need your help with another location. Where are we going? Kurt asked. Ororo peered around and said, let's find a subway entrance first. Whether it was the benefit of his teleportation ability or just a natural talent, Nightwalker Kurt had a keen sense of places he'd been to, and his sense of direction was impeccable. He immediately pointed out the direction of the nearest subway entrance and led Ororo towards it. He didn't use teleportation so as not to startle the ordinary people around him. This was also Professor X's insistence: teleportation should only be used when necessary or when no one was around to see. The New York subway was always busy. Thanks to being New Yorkers, most people kept their heads down, hurried along, and wouldn't spare a second's attention to those around them. This was why no one paid any attention to the two mutants walking around them. Perhaps a black lunatic appeared on the subway, screaming about an alien bug chewing at the rear of the car, and everyone would still sit calmly. Looking at the blocked gate, Ororo felt the urge to jump the gate like the other young people, but he felt embarrassed to do so with Kurt. Besides, he couldn't teleport to places he hadn't been to or seen, so Ororo bought him the cheapest tickets. Having never ridden such a crowded subway, Kurt expected him to have some fun. But just as he was about to board the train before the doors closed, Ororo grabbed him and stood on the platform, watching the train leave. "Well, it's leaving. Aren't we getting on?" Kurt asked. Ororo shook his head and said, "No. Let's go this way." Because a subway train had just left, the platform was quite sparsely populated. Ororo led Kurt off the platform and walked along the tracks. After a short distance, they turned into an abandoned subway line. As the world's leading metropolis, New York's underground development is beyond the imagination of ordinary people. It's not just the subway lines that are intricate, but also sewage systems such as sewers. Some are in use, some are half-developed, some are abandoned, and some are even secretly excavated by unknown organizations. It can be said that no one has a complete grasp of the entire situation of New York's underground world, which gives some people a little convenience. Compared to the homeless people you can see on the streets, there are countless times more homeless people wandering around in New York's underground world, and their lives are even more difficult. As long as you fall into this place, there is no decent person. This is a realm beyond the reach of police and official authorities, where a hidden order operates, silently resisting the dark side of non-humans like vampires and werewolves, or even enduring their exploitation. Kurt, originally living with his gypsy adoptive mother in his European hometown, was lured to Germany, where he was on the verge of ending up in a place like this. However, in Berlin, when he was forced into his first life-or-death cage fight among mutants, he was rescued by Mystique. This led him to join Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters and become a member of the X-Men. Kurt was fortunate, having never been familiar with this underground world until today, when he was brought in again by Ororo. Chapter 155 Bowery King. Of course, Kurt didn't believe he'd been framed by Ororo and sold to such a place. But being cautious, or rather timid, by nature, he was quite repulsed by the atmosphere of the sewer. By contrast, Ororo, having wandered Egypt since childhood, eking out a living as a thief and pickpocket, was no stranger to such surroundings. While not entirely at home, he knew his way around this world. Walking along the abandoned subway line, following the dim light of smuggled electricity, Ororo soon spotted the graffiti he was looking for and turned into a reclaimed space. It looked like it was intended to be a subway station, but for some reason it had been abandoned. Now, it resembled a settlement, and in the dark corners, where the light couldn't reach, a number of piercing eyes shone. "I'm here to find Bowery King," Ororo declared. A hoarse, elderly voice boomed from the darkness nearby, saying, "There's no one by that name here." "Then what about New York's Beggar King? Doesn't that person exist either?" Ororo looked toward the source of the voice and said, "Come on, this isn't my first time dealing with him. Why are you being so defensive, Storm of the X-Men? You're so dazzling, so glittering. You don't look like someone who needs to deal with sewer rats like us. There are some things those big men in suits can't do. You help me, and I'll help you." "I understand that rule," Ororo said. A whisper echoed in the darkness. Soon, an old beggar, leaning on an iron cane, emerged from the darkness. He looked like he'd suffered a stroke, with half his face paralyzed. One eye was wide open, while the other was squinting, giving him a terrifying look. His clothes were indescribable, dirty, smelly, torn, and heavy, as if he were wearing his entire fortune. He approached, glancing up and down at the two with his one working eye. Kurt's body tingled, a shiver surging through his head. Just before Kurt could bear it any longer and attempt to teleport away with Ororo, the old beggar finally turned and said, "Follow me." Slowly, they followed him up the steps of the abandoned subway station. Then, through the smashed open wall, they entered the basement of an apartment building. Don't mistake this building for something respectable. It was covered in graffiti and homeless people's cardboard houses. Then, they ascended the seemingly unguarded staircase. Kurt listened to the thump of the iron crutch, and with that sound, the lingering feeling of a wild animal poised to bite him at any moment lingered. Finally, amidst this oppressive atmosphere, they reached the top floor. The old beggar opened the door to the rooftop and retraced his steps. Aurora was the first to step through the door, and Kurt, though extremely reluctant, followed. They arrived at the rooftop of a building, where pigeon co-ops were placed everywhere, and pigeons were constantly flying out and back. Aurora turned left and right with familiarity, and walked into the center of the pigeon coop array. It was much more spacious here, like a small park, with a few benches at the edge of the open space. An elderly, fat black man who was also dressed as a beggar, immediately raised his hands and shouted happily after seeing Aurora. "Aha, stormed from the X-Men, Ms. Aurora Monroe, I thought you would drop from the sky like an angel as usual." Aurora stepped forward and hugged Black, saying, "If I had come here by myself, I would have flown over. But today I brought a new friend to learn the way. And I don't want to suddenly appear with him and then be shot and received by your people with submachine guns." "Aha, a blue-skinned mutant." Fat Black stretched out a hand very gentlemanly and introduced himself. "Bowery King, nice to meet you." Kurt shook hands with the other party in a panic and said, Kurt Wagner, Nightcrawler from the X-Men, right?" Yes, sir, don't be afraid, Kurt." "Can I call you Kurt?" "Yes, sir." Fat Black grinned and said, "Kurt, as long as you treat us kindly, we will treat you kindly. You have to pay for what you want. Isn't that reasonable?" "Yes, that's reasonable, sir." Fat Black patted the thin mutant on the shoulder and said, "Just call me Bowery. Or call me King. Most of my friends call me that to show their respect." "Okay, King, sir." "No need for sir, just King." Fat Black smiled. Bowery King stopped teasing the young mutant and turned to his old acquaintance. "So, what's the matter with Storm's visit today? Our companion, Jean Grey, has gone missing. I need your help locating her and notifying us. I brought Kurt here so he could be the contact." "Oh, another X-Man. What's the reason you're so anxious to find this companion? Did he run off with someone? Or stole some valuable secret?" Fat Black inquired, his expression fascinated by gossip. Aurora spoke frankly. "He's in danger right now. He overturned 2 police cars when we met. The police might have issued a warrant for his arrest, but I don't think they'll accomplish anything other than sending more people to their deaths. You don't want a major war like the one in Egypt or Cuba to happen in New York, do you? No matter what gets blown up, it's not what anyone wants. The best thing to do is notify the X-Men." "Haha, notify the X-Men. If we can't solve it ourselves, and it's mutant-related, we'd obviously call in the X-Men. Why bother asking you to come all this way? Tell me, do you miss me? I'm more worried that you'll get into trouble before you even think of asking the X-Men. If you don't come to us for an explanation, you won't be able to appease your subordinates. That would only be a bad outcome for everyone. Tell me, do I miss you, my king?" Storm stretched out a finger and tickled Bowery King's chin, as if tempting him. His own white hair began to flutter, and his eyes rolled back, as if he were 100,000 volts at a disagreement. "Ha ha. Fat Black retreated, not wanting to be electrocuted again. His skin was already dark enough. He quickly said, "I'll inform my people. That deserted X-Men is dangerous. Just inform them, don't let them know." "That's right, that's it, you understand us," Aurora said with a smile. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 156: The Dangerous Attitude of Officials. X's office. Hank McCoy sat at the principal's desk in the beast's humanoid form. The results of his and Reed Richards' research were scattered across the table. Professor X, having just finished a phone call with his White House liaison, looked distraught. Hank hurriedly asked, "What's the White House saying? Is the president willing to talk to us?" Shaking his head, Professor X said, "Not optimistic. Their rhetoric isn't strong, but it doesn't hold up to any real action. It's all diplomatic rhetoric, but we've presented evidence. Jean's loss of control wasn't his own will, but was influenced by those aliens. The photos clearly show the alien warship, don't they? That's not enough. Why not? Are the photos we faxed not clear enough, so the White House doesn't believe our story? In that case, I'll go to Washington and show them the original photos. Hank, holding the original photos he and Reid had developed, was about to run out. Professor X stopped him, saying, "The White House says photos alone aren't enough. A judge needs both witnesses and physical evidence to convict. How can you convince the White House of our story with just a photo? Not to mention that we can't even convince ourselves with that story. Everyone knows it's just an excuse." Hank asked anxiously, "What evidence does the White House need? Alien corpses, living aliens who know their overall plan and are high enough in rank, or even that space battleship? Or maybe, or what? Gene, are you going to send him out like a guinea pig?" Hank said angrily. Professor X said with equal emotion, "I never said that, and I can't do that." Then, "We hand over that Henry Brown? Did he say he was an alien?" Hank came up with a bad idea. No matter how stupid he was, Professor X would never agree to such a bad idea with so many loopholes. He asked in return, "How can you be sure that Henry Brown and those aliens are on the same side? How are you going to hand him over? We've all been taught a lesson by him, even if we're scattered here and there. Besides, we're either injured or on the run, we're not even a full fighting force. Should we just tell the White House and let them find a way to capture him themselves? Have you ever considered that if he truly has nothing to do with that battleship in outer space, we've simply offended a powerful enemy? He was harmless to begin with." Hank also knew that his idea was not on point, but now he didn't know what to do. The official attitude has always been the biggest obstacle to mutant affairs. As long as the US government shows a friendly attitude towards mutants, even if someone makes small moves in private, at least mutants generally have a chance to breathe. A neutral attitude without expressing any position is the most troublesome, because the US government at this time may do anything. If the US government shows a hostile attitude, let alone the restart of the shutdown Sentinel project, the overwhelming oppression and targeting from official forces will make it difficult for mutants to breathe. Even Xavier's school for gifted youngsters was targeted and bombed by the military. Several Omega-level mutants and the X-Men's headquarters have been treated like this, so how should those ordinary mutants deal with it? It was in this dilemma that Professor X kept thinking about the origin of mutants. The same is true for Magneto, but he chose a different path from Professor X. This is why these two are called the two spiritual leaders of mutants, and no one else is qualified to use such a title. Fortunately, Charles Xavier is bald, otherwise he would be worried about pulling out all his hair. Professor X slammed the table angrily and said, "This won't work. We need our own people in the government. How do we do it? Use mind control to control a congressman or a White House official." Hank continued to give bad ideas. Professor X immediately refuted. "Of course not. We can't use mind control. If it is exposed, our situation will be even more difficult. We need to have one of our own, standing in those positions conspicuously." Hank said, "How do we do it? Elect congressmen and let mutants win the support of ordinary people? Even if you have astronomical amounts of money, it will be difficult to succeed if you throw it into this bottomless pit. The only possibility is to convince the government to establish an agency specifically for mutant affairs, with one of our own people in charge. But that's not something we can do right away, and it won't help Gene, I know." With another thump on the table, Professor X maneuvered his wheelchair so that he faced the door, out of sight of anyone. "I know," he said. "Let me think about it." Seeing his longtime friend seemingly unwilling to continue communicating, Hank McCoy had no choice but to leave the office. He had to inform someone else of the situation. And that person was even more troublesome. In the infirmary, the older students of the junior school were temporarily filing in as nurses. Jean Grey was usually in charge, but now she was gone. Next to Quicksilver was a stack of physics books, ranging from elementary to advanced. He was struggling to read them, using some tools to assist him. Mystique, in her original form, with blue skin and red hair, lay resting in the hospital bed. Her vital signs, after the ups and downs of the first 24 hours, had stabilized. Perhaps he'll recover even faster than expected, Hank thought as he checked the instrument data. In fact, Mystique had noticed Hank entering the infirmary. He was simply regulating his breathing, soothing the pain in his internal organs. Doing so would help his mutant abilities accelerate the process of his body and internal organs returning to normal. After a brief pause, he opened his eyes and looked at the man beside the bed, who was looking at him lovingly. "Any good news?" Mystique asked. "Raven, You shouldn't dwell on this. Get more rest, Hank advised. When I die, you'll have plenty of time to rest. Now, give me some good news. Knowing this woman's personality, Hank had come to the infirmary, ready to share his latest findings. But he couldn't resist trying to persuade her. As expected, his advice was met with a rebuff. Hank had no choice but to resign himself to telling Mystique what he and Reed Richards had discovered, as well as Charles's response and the White House's response after notifying Professor X. Chapter 157: A Woman's Request. After Mystique finished listening to the story, he asked, "Where's Jean? Have they found her whereabouts?" Scott, Aurora, and Kurt are all out looking, and the older students are out looking for information as well, so no one has found Jean yet. Good. Mystique twisted her body, trying to sit up. Hank quickly controlled the folding function of the bed, allowing his upper body to be supported by the rising bed, so that they could talk face to face. "Hank, I need you to find Jean yourself and bring him to a safe place," Mystique said. Hank didn't understand and said, "Aren't everyone doing their best to find Jean?" "No, that's not safe." "I don't trust Charles," Mystique said frankly, expressing her concerns. "Why? I'm tired of you men. Your indifferent attitude towards small sacrifices for the sake of a greater goal. Who knows what Charles is thinking? Maybe he's willing to sacrifice a man for the greater good of mutant kind." Charles wouldn't do that, right? Hank wanted to defend Professor X, who wasn't present, but the words simply couldn't come out. Mystique raged. "I simply wanted to eliminate Trask, the executor of the Sentinel Project, and stop that ridiculous plan. And you listened to Wolverine, who claimed to be from the future, and tried to stop me. Eric even said I was a threat to the future and wanted to kill me. He wanted to kill me, he actually wanted to kill me. Before that, would you have believed such a thing? They say women hold grudges the most." Hank whispered sheepishly, "That's because Wolverine from the future warned us that if Trask were to inherit your X gene, it would greatly enhance the Sentinel's capabilities, so, that's why you wanted to kill me? Even you think it's right?" Watching her electrocardiogram and blood pressure values soar, Hank quickly comforted the ailing Mystique, saying, "Of course this isn't right. So don't be angry. If anyone else comes up with this kind of awful idea next time, I'll definitely spit in their face for you." Taking deep breaths to calm her emotions, Mystique lowered her voice and said viciously, "So, in this situation, how can you expect me to trust Charles? He's exactly the same type of person as Eric. Vain, blind. Look at what he's been doing lately. Sending the X-Men on government missions, good or bad, dangerous or not. More than once, we've risked our lives for things that have nothing to do with us, and then, he took a few medals and sent us packing. I warned you that his actions were dangerous and unfair. But you wouldn't listen to me. Instead, you chose to trust him once, twice, and finally, all the time." Okay, comforting Mystique, whose monitoring instrument readings were beginning to falter, Hank asked bluntly, "Then what do you want me to do?" Mystique said decisively, "Find Jean first and protect him. Don't hand him over to anyone, not Charles or Eric. No matter who wants to stop us, aliens or the US government, if you don't want to kill people, just beat them away. Can you promise me that you will help me do this?" Hank showed an embarrassment. This is almost equivalent to challenging 3 authorities at once. He is really not suitable for such a thing. Seeing this, Mystique immediately said, "If you can't do it, I won't force you. I will do it myself." As she said, she was about to pull out the surveillance probe and infusion needle on her body, preparing to get out of bed. Looking at this situation, Hank was still in a hurry to hold people down. He hurriedly said, I will do it. You just have a good rest and don't think too much." After staring at Hank's face for a while, Mystique lay back on the bed. But he was still restless, and suggested, "Find that Henry. If he wants to prove that he is not on the same group with that group of aliens, fight them. Anyway, you are also worried about whether the two sides are together. Rather than letting him hide in the shadows, it's better to bring him out into the open, so we can be more prepared. Then go find Eric. Whether it's fighting the aliens or controlling Jean, the X-Men can't do it alone. We need Eric's help," Hank said in surprise, "so we didn't hand him over to Eric or let him handle the aftermath. But we want him to help, is that what you mean?" Mystique gritted her teeth and said bitterly, "He owes me. Tell him not to think that hiding on Genosha means that what happened back then is over. It's not over. If he doesn't help me this time, I'll make him pay a bigger price next time." They say don't offend women. Thinking of the expression on Eric's face when he relayed these words to him, Hank felt an inexplicable sense of satisfaction. Okay, I'll do as you say. I'll pass your words on to Eric. Any other instructions? Mystique added. Take Scott, Aurora, and Kurt with you. Don't leave any hands to Charles. Without help, nothing he can do will work. Well, everyone was on board. Hank wanted to ask Charles and Eric, why did you offend Raven? He told Mystique to lie down and tuck her in. Hank said, anything else? Yes. Reaching out from under the covers with difficulty, Mystique grabbed Hank and said, promise me you'll bring Jean back intact. He didn't deserve this. We made the mistake of putting all this on him. Get rid of those bad-intentioned people. He needs us now more than ever. Okay, I know. Hank tucked Mystique's outstretched hand back under the covers. And more. Well, what else? You have to come back safely too. The same goes for you and everyone else. What we do should not be based on the premise of sacrificing any of us. A simple sentence made Hank feel warm in his heart. The previous worries seemed to have disappeared. He smiled and said, don't worry, I will get things done. Everyone will come back safely. Mystique further warned, if Charles follows, be careful of Charles's ideas. Be especially wary of the US government and the US military. You can never imagine how cruel they will be in secret. What that group of people did, even if a real devil saw it, would feel as pure as an angel. Chapter 158 Call Again. Once again in Switzerland, Henry received a call at Audrey Hepburn's house. This time, he truly felt the urge to beat up all the X-Men. Remember, last time, he returned covered in dust, but Audrey Hepburn looked askance, mistaking him for someplace else, using the sky as a blanket and the ground as a mat, to engage in 800 rounds of unrestrained sex. This time, the call arrived again, and the sharp-eared Audrey Hepburn trotted into the kitchen, half revealing her face as she peeked in. Her eyes were almost crescent-shaped, a real pain for those large eyes. With a forced smile, Henry's forehead bulged with veins, and through gritted teeth, he asked the man on the phone, what's the reason you're dragging me over this time? I thought we'd settled our debt last time. What? Fight the aliens. Henry bit his tongue, barely able to stop himself. Then, remembering his earlier snarky remark, fight the aliens and then come back for him, now that the aliens were here, it seemed like he had no choice but to fight them. He really wanted to ask the other person if they could just treat their words as fart, just blow their noses when they smelled them, and forget about it. Seeing Ms. Hepburn's face becoming more and more exposed, with an excited expression that made her want to rush forward and ask questions face to face, Henry knew he couldn't stay there any longer. If he didn't give this old aunt some time to calm down, she might not get any sleep tonight and be tortured all night. Okay, where are we meeting? The Kryptonian, unable to bear it, had to resort to the last of his 36 strategies, running away. After finding the meeting place, Henry hung up the phone and looked towards the kitchen. The Oscar-winning actress seized the opportunity and jumped out, saying, going out again, son? What was this feeling of a son secretly going on a date and being caught by his mother? The next question would probably be whether he had taken any safety measures. But Audrey Hepburn ultimately didn't ask about safety. Instead, she said, you have to be polite when you're talking to girls. Otherwise, you'll be disliked sooner or later. Damn, these aren't girlfriends. They're a bunch of mutants who are no different from monsters. I'm going to have a big fight, yes, but not a gut-wrenching one. Ms. Hepburn, who was helping Henry adjust his collar, suddenly had a golden glint in her eyes. She looked him up and down and said, you're not going out with a change of clothes? This loungewear's so tasteful. Her best friend was a top fashion figure and designer, and she herself was a trendsetter. Audrey Hepburn's discerning taste had long been cultivated. Henry's loungewear was a supermarket item, bought in Los Angeles. His dress code was basically clean and unripped. Although he had been a bit of a street actor for a while and had gained some fashion knowledge, keeping up with trends cost money. His only fashionable touch was an Armani suit, which he wore when accompanying women. Everything else was cheap supermarket finds. Cheap items are okay if you know how to style them, but the material is a bit inferior. From a distance, no one can tell. But would you wear them on a date? Audrey Hepburn offered some advice, saying, Luca left some clothes at home, and he has a similar figure to you. Why not try his clothes? I prepared his clothes for him, and many of them are unworn. Even if I gave them to you directly, he wouldn't know. So don't worry. Luca Dotti, the woman's second son, was born in 1970. He and Henry looked about the same generation, so he was from the same generation. That's why Ms. Hepburn said that. But Henry really wasn't going on a date. He smiled bitterly, taking a few steps back, away from Ms. Hepburn, who was about to strip him naked, and said, "Boss, I'll do it myself. After all, the occasion I'm going to is a bit special." "It's a bit special." He raised his eyebrows and gave a playful smile. That was the epitome of an actress. It was quite lethal, and even the Kryptonians were broken. But he finally managed to suppress the impulse in her nature to dress up the doll. He said, "In that case, I won't bother you anymore. Are you coming back for dinner?" "Well, I think it will be the same as last time. I don't know how late it will be. So don't wait for me. I'll take care of it outside by myself," Henry said honestly. After taking a few steps back, Audrey Hepburn's eyes sparkled, and she smiled sweetly and said, "Bon voyage," French, "Bon voyage." The Kryptonians fled in panic. Henry, tumbling and scrambling, fled the doorway, but didn't soar into the sky. Instead, he pondered his next move. 2 days ago, he'd experienced what seemed to be the small-town battle in the movie Dark Phoenix. As the saying goes, no one comes to a temple for no good reason. The X-Men had come to him again. It couldn't be a drink, it had to be another spectacle. And they'd just been trying to stop him by talking about fighting aliens. "It was my fault for being so rude earlier." So, was it because of the butterfly effect I'd created, allowing them to discover the aliens' existence earlier? Think of the movie, where the two sides inexplicably started fighting. It felt quite absurd, each with their own story, and the instant they met, they started fighting. I wondered if they themselves had this strange feeling of, who are they, and why are they fighting? Anyway, if nothing unexpected happened, if he was summoned, he'd have to face several consecutive battles, and he'd have to be exposed to the US government. To maintain his identity, a proper disguise was necessary. So, a suit? Even without the hood, he'd need to change his face. Of course, staying out of it was an option, and it seemed most consistent with his original character. But seeing a movie in a privileged seat on a set, a privilege no one else had, was he going to give up a free ticket? Henry hadn't considered getting into any kind of treasonous behavior. Even if World War II broke out and nuclear bombs were flying everywhere, he'd still watch Earth implode into chaos. But considering that Mystique was a particularly troublesome mutant in every version of the story, he'd been tricked by her using Audrey Hepburn's appearance last time. While he didn't expect to be tricked a second time, he couldn't resist her. Being targeted by someone who could change their appearance at will was, in a sense, even more troublesome than being targeted by intelligence agencies. As for those who thought Mystique was the chosen one, why didn't they consider whether they could accept her original blue skin, red hair, and appearance? If not, if, in the middle of the process, he suddenly changed from a celebrity to his original appearance, he'd be terrified. It wasn't impossible for her to cause him lifelong impotence. Not to mention that he's likely survived World War II, at least 50 years old. He's the same generation as the old ant in the room. Henry shuddered at the thought. They say there are 3 evils for men: cold tea, weak wine, and constant harassment. Now it seems, it's not only damaging to my body, but also to my young soul. The wisdom of our ancestors truly lives up to my expectations. Chapter 159 Meeting. Genosha Island, the refugee home of mutants. Eric, the person in charge, was speechless after seeing the X-Men's X-Jet fighter, the Blackbird, land on the island twice in a short period of time. But it was not easy to lift the fighter jet and throw it into the sea. So Eric could only lead another team to line up to welcome the X-Men. If there was a disagreement, they would just be sent on their way. The love-hate relationship between the Brotherhood of Mutants and the X-Men has historical roots. However, the person who got off the plane this time was not the rebellious young man from last time, but an old friend, Hank McCoy. Hank stepped forward and extended his hand to greet him. Eric didn't want to embarrass his old friend. He shook his hand back, saying, "You know, we're under U.S. military surveillance. X-fighters landing here every so often isn't a good thing for us." Hank gave a helpless smile and said, "It can't be helped. This time, it's urgent. Raven asked me to come." Another old friend's name made Eric's mouth twitch. He asked, "What did Raven say?" After quickly recounting the whole story and showing the photo as evidence, Hank concluded, "Raven, I hope you can send some help. With only half the X-Men left, we might not be able to take on a battleship of aliens." "We can't." "All right, Eric pointed to the outline of the artifact in the photo and said, "If we discover something like this, shouldn't the US military intervene? Even an Omega-level mutant is at best a foot soldier. You can't expect every one of us to be able to shoot down a plane, let alone a spacecraft flying outside the atmosphere, whether it's a battleship or not. My abilities don't reach that far, and they're useless. Unless you have a plan to send us up there and directly invade, we'd be like monkeys roaring at the sky with rocks." Finally, someone wise enough raised a practical question. Expecting aliens to have unused spacecraft and unfire their battleships' cannons, sending people ashore for hand-to-hand combat, what a ridiculous tactical approach. The fact that someone like that could command an alien warship meant there were idiots among the aliens who rose to power through nepotism. Unless there was some other ulterior motive. Hank could only offer a wry smile at this question and say, "This photo is our only evidence. I've since contacted numerous observatories and other space observation facilities. No one has found any other evidence proving an alien warship is in Earth orbit. Even Dr. Richards, who collaborated with me on developing this photo, couldn't find any more compelling evidence." In fact, what Hank didn't know was that Reed Richards did spend time looking for the existence of this space battleship, wanting to see it with his own eyes. But it only took him about half an hour. After getting no results, he went back to study the energy data of cosmic radiation. After all, there is no guarantee that the spacecraft is still in the same place. He couldn't find it, and his intuition was that the spacecraft had left or moved to another location, not that his search method was wrong. Without evidence, we have no way to convince the US government to order the US military to dispatch. But I'm afraid that by the time there is definite evidence, it will be too late. So we need your strength." Faced with such an unreasonable request, Eric subconsciously refused. Infantrymen attacking space battleships? Even if all the crew members are Omega-class mutants, they can't do that. If the other party has weapons of the Star Destroyer level in science fiction novels, the Earth will be shattered by you, let alone mutants. So this kind of thing feels very magical just by listening to it. Hank is very familiar with the little actions of this old friend. Seeing Eric's mouth curled and his teeth bared, he knew that he was going to refuse. He hurriedly said, "Raven said that you owe him this." Eric was stunned and said, "What do I owe him?" "It's the incident in 1973, Hank hinted vaguely. Eric showed a painful expression and said, "It happened almost 20 years ago, and he still holds a grudge." "Women, once you owe it, it's a lifelong thing." Hank spread his hands and said helplessly, "And you do owe him an apology, unless you said it somewhere I don't know. But from the attitude that he never mentioned it, you know." This made his teeth ache. Eric couldn't remember whether he had apologized for that incident. Anyway, when they met later, everyone tacitly agreed not to mention it. They thought that the matter was over. In fact, if it hadn't been mentioned today, he would have forgotten that it had happened. It seemed that the matter was not over, but was temporarily owed and would be used when needed. "Okay, I'll help," the compromised Eric said, "but you also have to know that I can't bring an army back to the United States. So I will only bring a small elite combat team. It's impossible to confront the alien army head-on. I can only achieve two goals, prove the existence of aliens and rescue Jean. As for how to attack the big ship, that's the military's business and has nothing to do with me." "No problem, as long as you are willing to help. Our main goal is to rescue Jean," Hank replied. Eric then called on them, "Honglian, Selene, the two of you go and get ready, and go to the United States with me to rescue people." Two humans who looked quite normal, one male and one female. If there was anything unusual about them, it was that the woman had a purple, three-point haircut, while the man had a waist-length braid, as if they were reversed. "Only two people?" Hank asked in surprise. Eric said, "They're far more capable than the young people you've trained, and I'll be coming too. Just me setting foot on American soil will make a lot of people nervous." "How can you expect me to bring more people?" "Okay," Hank nodded in concession. Suddenly, he added, "Oh, we're waiting for someone else." "Who?" "An outsider, aha, everyone." "I'm coming." Hank's response was unexpectedly interrupted. Everyone turned to look at the source of the voice, only to see a man in bizarre attire emerge from the woods. He wore a rose-red suit, a light yellow vest, a dark green shirt, and brown tap shoes. He had a slicked back, grass-green hair, and a face powdered to paler white than a ghost. A red nose and eyebrows, eyes painted in black cross-shaped eyeshadow, and smiling red lips drawn all the way to his cheeks. The person who came in jiggled his hips with every step, saying, "Knock, knock, who's outside? Soup, soup what? Super Joker, ha 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 ha." The person who came out laughed to himself. Chapter 160 The Terrible Battlesuit Soul. Despite being a classic American joke, no one present got the joke. They all stared in astonishment at the uninvited guest. "Where did this clown come from?" Eric asked disdainfully. Hank beside him said awkwardly, "Isn't he from your island? Trust me, if you did that on my territory, I'd feed him to the fish," Eric said disdainfully. The clown, walking with a swagger, glanced around and said, "This is the mutant reservation. I've learned a lot. By the way, where's your casino? Would you mind letting someone gamble? I don't have the capital, and if I lose, I can't afford to pay, but I can stay and perform clown shows. All you have to do is provide food and lodging." This was a satire on Genosha Island being an Indian reservation. Magneto Eric couldn't stand the taunting and wanted to teach the visitor a lesson. But his mouth didn't stop, instead continuing, "Look, this is all pristine scenery here. There aren't many genetically modified foods, right? Eating too much of that stuff isn't good for you, don't you know? When someone adds something, either the entire planet will turn into mutants, or all the mutants will die, leaving not a single one alive. Be careful, but this kind of poverty doesn't have its advantages. Environmentalists should live in places like this. They grow their own food and clothing, so they don't have to go hungry during bad times. They live an eco-friendly life without gasoline or electricity." Yeah, that's not right. Many of you are wearing polyester, not pure cotton, linen, or wool. That's not environmentally friendly. Or do you have a green petrochemical plant that can produce environmentally friendly plastic? I better have. Otherwise, I'll think you're on par with that so-called European environmentalist girl. She flies and takes trains everywhere, but refuses to ride a bike to give environmental speeches in air-conditioned rooms. After all, environmental protection is for us poor people. Look at this place. It's truly environmentally friendly. I think everyone could be even more environmentally friendly, right? Look, Genosha Island is located north of the Tropic of Cancer and has a tropical climate. And it's an island, so it's hot and humid. Actually, there's no need for everyone to wear so many clothes. Just like some of the natives, a leaf is enough, regardless of gender. You know what I mean." As the Joker's forehead trembled, his painted red eyebrows also trembled. His face was so heavily painted that it was almost impossible to tell what he looked like, yet he could still give people a mean look. Eric, who had originally wanted to teach him a lesson, decisively backed off. He said, "Why would a normal person argue with a psychopath, insisting on what the other person should look like?" It was like a non-human being who had to go and fight a dog. So Eric dismissed the team he had assembled, led the two designated followers, and each went to prepare for battle. For him, the most important thing was of course the mental protection helmet. As long as Professor X didn't do anything, he was almost invincible. Seeing that everyone had run away, Hank, who had nowhere to run, became the Joker's only target. He looked at the costumed clown in panic and suspicion, and asked timidly, "Who are you? Didn't you come to find me?" The Joker grabbed Hank McCoy, who was in a human form, and said, "You're using the excuse of fighting aliens to make me condescend to do such a trivial thing. Do you know that I'm making tens of cents every minute and I'm very busy, are you?" "Henry," Hank said in surprise. The Joker hooked his arm around Hank's neck and walked towards the X-Fighter. He said, "No, no, no, there's no Henry, there's only the Joker. Just like you, Hank is Hank, and Beast is Beast. Are the two names the same person or two people? I'm a pot of mixed soup. There's a little bit of everything in the soup. A little bit of super, a little bit of madness, a little bit of cowardice, a little bit of cheapness, a little bit of a loser, a little bit of a wimp, a little bit of a crooked butt, a little bit of everything. As for the main ingredient, of course it's water. I've already said it, water. You're like the sea. You're so blatantly cheating on the word count, don't you think it's going to make people hate you? By the way, you said we were going to fight aliens. Who are we going to fight? I'm the best at beating kids. I'll beat them until they're silent. If they dare to make a sound, I'll keep beating them until they're silent. So you came to the right person, have you seen it? The 18 rules of a loving father and a strict mother. I learned them when I was a kid, but never had the chance to use them. I don't have any children of my own, so I just used other people's rules to practice. They say why raise your own children? Other people's children are more fun. Don't you agree? Stop, 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 finally finding a chance to interrupt and call for a halt. Hank broke free from the arm that was hooked around his neck and said, "You're the Joker, right? I get it, stop talking. Get on the plane and find a seat. I need to prepare the takeoff procedures and I need to concentrate, okay? No talking." The Joker made a zipping gesture, climbed onto the X-Fighter, and plopped down in the pilot's seat. Seeing whose seat was taken, Hank asked dumbfoundedly, "Do you know how to fly a Blackbird?" "Of course I do. This is the landing gear handle," Hank said, pointing to the instruments and switches before him. "This is the takeoff button, this is the automatic reverse parking switch, and this is the radio channel dial, and this, my favorite, the airplane steering wheel, right? Let me think about it, it's supposed to be reversed. So if you turn it left, it goes right, and if you turn it right, it goes left. There's a coffee machine next to it. Just wondering, where's the parking brake?" "Great, that's all wrong," Hank said helplessly. "I beg you to sit in the back." "Why?" "The view is so great here," Hank said unwillingly. He adjusted the seat height and the backrest forward and backward. This was getting fun. Hank had no choice but to transform into beast form, grabbing Hank's head and pulling it back. The captured man offered no resistance. Like a dead rabbit being pulled by the ears, he was pulled from the driver's seat and shoved into any of the back seats. Hank even fastened his seatbelt. He had no tools or materials at hand, otherwise he would have found a piece of iron and welded him to the seat. With his brilliant mind, Hank could already imagine the hardships that lay ahead. When Magneto donned his iconic helmet and boarded the X-Men with Urine and Selene at the ready, he naturally spotted the uninvited guest in clown costume. "He's coming with us?" Magneto questioned Hank from the pilot's seat. Hank replied awkwardly, "He's the helper Raven specifically requested, a mutant." "No. He claims to be an alien." An awkward silence suddenly fell within the X-Men, and Magneto and the other three looked at the Joker. He blinked rapidly, then gave a pitiful, clear look like a puppy, one that made you want to punch him. Chapter 161 God's Prophecy. "Oh, Romeo, why are you Romeo? Deny your father, renounce your name, if you will not, then swear to be my love, and I shall cease to be a Capulet. Oh, Julian, why is your profile so prominent, as if concealing a protruding mouth part? Why is your hair braided like a warrior trained on earth? Why is your skin so dark? Oh, Romeo, should you not swear by the holy moon that paints the treetops silver? Oh, Julian, the moon is so changeable, waxing and waning, and I fear you will also change. This bud of love, illuminated by the rainbow, has turned this meeting into a cruel test. Good night, good night. Parting is so fortunate, so lucky, I am glad to see tomorrow's sun. Can heaven, without mercy, see through my fear? Ah, this is where I will make my eternal resting place, freeing you, a treacherous lover, from the long river of life. Eyes, take one last look at you, shoulders, a final embrace for you. Even if you say you love me, I'd rather be discovered by my family and perish at their hands than die tragically on the scene for your love." After taking off from the X-Fighter, Joker Zhao tried to strike up a conversation. But no one paid him any attention, so he simply took on multiple roles, singing a dramatic piece. If no one understood what he was singing, that would be fine. But Selene, the unassuming, flat-haired woman with a three-quarter-length haircut, did. Though he dressed simply like the others on Genosha Island, his demeanor clearly transcended that of a mere minion. From his every gesture, there was an inexplicable elegance that made it clear he was a man of many contradictions. At least, he understood Joker Zhao's operatic alteration, saying, "The classic duet of Romeo and Juliet is a deeply romantic scene. How can you still watch it after you've altered it like this?" No, I didn't alter it. This is a scene performed in a proper opera house, Joker Zhao argued. "What theater would be foolish enough to stage such a play?" Selene said with a look of disgust on her face. "Wait, let me calculate. Well, if you live another 32 years, you'll be able to see this masterpiece in a London theater. This is an absolute prophecy, absolutely true. Don't come to me, or I'll compensate you with a watermelon." Ha ha ha. Selene looked like she was going to continue arguing with the Joker, but was glared at by her boss, Magneto. "Shut up, Selene," humbled, obediently shut up. The Joker, undeterred by the loss of his conversation partner, launched into a solo classic opera rendition, "I once dreamed of the past. Dreams sailed high, life was full of hope. I dreamed love would never end, I dreamed God was so forgiving. Back then I was young and fearless, dreams were forged and squandered, Unable to bear it any longer, Magneto used his powers to rip a piece of metal from the X-Fighter's cabin and covered half of the Joker's face, silencing him. The act of destroying the fighter plane did make Hank cry out in dissatisfaction. But seeing that the Joker could only whimper and was unable to utter a single word, Hank endured it and did not ask Eric to put the metal sheet back together. Finally, a moment of peace returned to the cabin. After a while, the Joker frantically gestured to the others, but no one understood. He had no choice but to unbuckle his seatbelt, walk over to Hank, who was at the wheel, and also make a flurry of gestures. Fortunately, Hank had been a teacher at Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters for a long time, and unlike Professor Xavier's Charles, he could use telepathy. When faced with children who could not speak, he always refused to push Professor X's way, so he also learned sign language. He quickly understood Joker's meaning and said in surprise, "What? You talked too much and got thirsty, so you need water. Are you asking me where the water is?" Joker nodded. This gesture was recognized by everyone. Without a second thought, Hank pointed to a cabinet at the rear of the plane, marked with a medical symbol, and said, "There's emergency supplies under the medical cabinet. There's bottled water inside." With a swaggering, strutting pace, the Joker made his way to the rear of the plane and retrieved a bottle of water from under the medical cabinet. Then, sensing something was amiss, everyone realized his mouth was taped shut. How was he supposed to drink? The Joker unscrewed the cap from the bottle, and as he tried to put it in his mouth, the metal seal blocked his mouth. Everyone expected him to turn and beg Magneto for mercy, but the Joker used a single finger to pry the seal away. He gulped down the entire bottle of water, then put the seal back on. He returned to his seat, fastened his seatbelt, and continued to whimper, unable to speak, appearing utterly frustrated. Witnessing the entire scene, Magneto could only think, "Are you serious?" Hank, who had also watched the entire process with his X-Fighter on autopilot, was now more panicked than anyone else. He just wanted to rush back to the juvenile school and tell Raven, who was still recovering in the infirmary, that we didn't want this helper, okay? Seeing this guy's current performance made him so panicked. What he would do during the battle was even more outrageous. When the X-Fighter landed in a park space in Queens, it was night in New York. But for this brightly lit metropolis, life has just begun. Hank was executing the standard landing and shutdown procedure, while the others got off the X-Fighter as if they were running away. There was no way around it. There was someone on the plane who was really good at getting around, and everyone almost couldn't hold back and beat him up. The clown super slowly unbuckled his seat belt, pulled off the iron mask on his mouth, and breathed in the stale air of New York City. He also used his hands to comb his long back hair, then turned around and prepared to get off the plane. The series of movements made the beast, which transformed into a strong blue man, lose its self-confidence and wanted to find a mirror to comb his stiff, messy hair. It's just that the two who were a little slow in their movements couldn't get off the plane, because Magneto and others who ran ahead were blocking the door to get off the plane. Joker looked forward from the gap in the crowd, and was shocked to see a group of American soldiers with live ammunition and full body protection, half surrounding the door. What's the matter? Are they here to distribute equipment? One bullet per person, directly into the forehead. How thoughtful, how embarrassing. If it were you, I would just put it on the ground and let us take it ourselves. Why are you so enthusiastic? No one paid attention to Joker's crazy talk, and the officer leading the soldiers shouted, "Magneto, the US government has not canceled the arrest warrant for you. If you dare to get off the plane and set foot on the US mainland, I will execute the arrest warrant. Leave now." Chapter 162 Conflict. The GI's warning was actually a shrewd move. Otherwise, upon sighting the humans, they could have arrested Magneto, who was already classified as a terrorist, or even shot him on the spot. But an Omega-level mutant, especially one with extensive combat experience, was no match for him without his full-body plastic suit. This was clear not only to the GIs but also to Magneto. However, his target wasn't these people, so he asked the Beast, who was approaching from behind, with a hint of disdain, "Did you arrange this?" The Beast replied helplessly, "If it were me, there would surely be a smarter way." Selene, who also possessed telepathic powers, said, "Professor X sent him here." Charles. "I'd say it's not surprising at all," Magneto said, commenting on those who were absent or hiding in the shadows. What are you doing?" a soldier suddenly shouted. He pointed his gun at the eccentrically dressed Joker, who had surreptitiously exited his X-Force and was about to slip away. The captured Joker immediately became the center of attention. He looked at everyone awkwardly, pointed in a direction, and said, "I drank too much water on the plane, and now I need to pee." The restroom is over there," the soldier replied, baffled. "Oh, thanks." Joker changed direction. "This way, right." "Oh, no. Stop right there. Don't move." The soldier pointed his gun at Joker. Joker, frozen in the stealthy pose of a thief, glanced at the crowd with a sly gaze and asked, "So, now? Look. A shooting star." Even though it sounded like a joke, everyone couldn't help but look in Joker's direction. The dark sky seemed to be raining a fiery red meteor shower, each streak of fire hurtling straight towards New York City. Hank immediately thought of a possibility, muttering, "Could it be an alien warship from outer space landing?" Unexpectedly, the American GI commander, upon seeing this, excitedly shouted, "Mutants attack! All hands on deck!" The GIs, skeptical of the existence of aliens, were more convinced of the mutants than aliens when they saw the attack on New York. After all, the notorious terrorist leader, Magneto, was present. Without hesitation, the soldiers, receiving the order, pulled the trigger. Rifles unleashed a barrage of bullets, without warning or mercy. Magneto, not one to sit still, stopped all incoming fire. Selene coordinated, using her mind control to freeze all the soldiers. Duran used her hair whip to fling everyone away. With a single, smooth move, the three of them instantly repelled all the soldiers surrounding the X-Fighter's hatch. The bullets seemed to have lost all momentum and fell to the ground, never returning to the soldiers who had fired them. It was Magneto's mercy. Magneto turned and said to Beast, "So, now our enemies include not only aliens but also American soldiers, right?" "That's not what Charles wanted," Hank argued. "But things turned out this way." "Not ideal, huh?" Magneto addressed the two men he had brought with him, saying, "Find Jean, take her, and we'll leave." Magneto understood his situation perfectly. The group of people who had fallen from the sky, mistaken for mutants, were not his people. No matter how confident he was, he didn't need to tangle with a bunch of idiots when he was outnumbered. Furthermore, he had to consider Genosha, the last home of mutants, and it was unlikely they would vehemently offend the United States. This was why he simply repelled them and didn't kill the offending soldiers. "Selene," Magneto called out to the witch, once the Black Queen of the Hellfire Club. With a long lifespan, she possessed unfathomable strength, making her arguably one of the most powerful mutants on Genosha, aside from himself. The nearly immortal sorceress didn't need to do anything. Even at her lowest power, she could sense the powerful life force, coming from a certain direction. "Right there," Selene said. Magneto, without hesitation, addressed everyone, "Let's go. If you don't want us to kill too many people, finish this quickly and leave as soon as possible." Even Beast, the X-Man, couldn't find fault with this. They'd found the people themselves, there was no way they'd turn against them and send them away. Besides, it was just as Raven had feared. Charles had teamed up with the US military. What if he handed Jean over? He'd promised to get that poor girl to safety. So Beast followed Magneto's lead, grabbing the Joker, who seemed to be trying to escape or had gone the wrong way. They finally reached the edge of the park, near the road. With a poof, Professor X, Cyclops, and Storm, using Nightcrawler's teleportation ability, positioned themselves before Magneto and his companions. Before anyone on either side spoke, the Joker preemptively said, "Hey, there's this bald head. Do you mind if I wax it? I think I could use it as a crystal ball and make pretty good predictions." Professor X, his face darkening, asked, "Eric, your new mutant? Thank goodness it's not. You should ask Hank, he brought them here." The Beast looked embarrassed. But Professor X received the incredible answer from his consciousness, and he decided not to pursue it further. The last time he invaded this alien's mind, the result was disastrous. He didn't want to experience it again. Turning his attention back to his old rival, Professor X said, "Eric, I don't care what Raven demands of you. Leave now. What's happening here has nothing to do with you." Magneto said, "A fellow mutant was wronged and came to me for help. I regret not lending a hand in time. I won't make that mistake again. Instead, I'm asking why you called in the US military." "The US military is to deal with those people." Professor X pointed to the sky, where the meteor shower continued to fall. "But you seem to mistake the reinforcements you called for my own." Do you think apologizing and then leaving at this point will help? If so, they wouldn't be US military anymore, Magneto stated coldly. Professor X said, so don't you think you should leave to avoid further misunderstandings, and then let you hand Jean over to them? I wouldn't do such a thing, Professor X said angrily. Yes, old friend, I trust you. But I don't trust them, Magneto said pointedly, looking towards the more American soldiers surrounding them from both sides. What are you going to do when they insist on snatching you away? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 163 Street Fight. Even if the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Mutants, their old rivals, didn't want to fight, the newly arrived US military would have helped them make up their minds. They greeted each other with a barrage of bullets, a gesture both warm and decisive, leaving Professor X unable to even try to mediate. The US military during this period was incredibly arrogant, and this was clearly on display. Furthermore, some of the incoming troops were equipped with anti-mutant equipment, particularly plastic bullets and rifles that Magneto couldn't control. Magneto was no pushover. Under unusual circumstances, plastic bullets might have proved useless. But on ordinary streets, magnetism-affected metal objects were readily available. The entire world was his ally, this was his home turf. To defeat the heavily armed US military, the battle-hardened Magneto had countless ways to defeat them. He simply controlled a roadside car and blocked the group's fire. This was because Magneto had no intention of killing them, otherwise, the car would have simply smashed into the soldiers, severely injuring them if not killed. His attitude mirrored that of Garen and Selene. They came to save their fellow mutants, not to fight the US military to death. Furthermore, they had the burden of Genosha Island behind them, so they couldn't act solely on personal preference. Killing the US troops was easy, but defending the last remaining mutant homeland would be difficult. Garen, of South Pacific Island descent, was not only massive, but his long braid could suddenly grow and lash out like a whip. While lacking the agility of an octopus's tentacles, he possessed immense strength, sending ordinary humans flying. A single blow from his blade would deflect a bullet. Selene's fighting style appeared much simpler, employing only a dagger. However, he fully utilized his psychic abilities, not attempting to completely control others, but rather allowing the soldiers to unconsciously move their guns away from him. Simply put, even if he stood still, the American soldiers, believing they had their aim, would ultimately only graze him. Because, as hinted, his position wasn't actually where the soldiers were targeting. However, Selene didn't attack the soldiers, only occasionally fending off close-quarters enemies. He had a more important task, controlling the elusive and erratic Nightcrawler on the battlefield. As Magneto and the Brotherhood of Mutants launched a counterattack against the US military, the X-Men also took action. Their goal wasn't to defeat the enemy, but to prevent Magneto and his men from inflicting further damage, particularly to the US soldiers. Cyclops and Storm, needless to say, didn't even need Professor X's command. As soon as Magneto attacked, they followed suit, as if on a whim. Unlike the former two, Nightcrawler didn't have the courage to engage in close combat. His strength lay in using his teleportation ability to quickly provide support and deploy combat forces. This was especially true for Professor X, who, with his mobility impairment, was barely able to navigate the complex terrain using his wheelchair. Selene's ability effectively prevented Nightcrawler's teleportation location from deviating. Nightcrawler's abilities require contact to activate with his companions, which indirectly limits his ability to evade the X-Men on the battlefield. If the two sides were solely focused on this, the X-Men and the US military would likely have a slight advantage over the Brotherhood of Mutants. However, in this sudden battle, Beast Tank clearly sided with Magneto. Cyclops and Storm, when faced with this mentor and friend, would inevitably hold back and be sent flying. This was partly because Beast Tank was less concerned than the two smaller figures. Secondly, neither Cyclops nor Storm could defeat the tough beast without their ultimates, and using them would be prohibitive for inflicting excessive damage. With their hands tied, being swatted away by Beast at close range was the only outcome. Meanwhile, the Joker sat on the nearby railing, a hot dog in each hand, munching away on it. Just as Cyclops, unable to resist, unleashed a blast of vision to send Beast flying, He prepared to join forces with the US military to surround Magneto. Unfortunately, Magneto, unfazed by the onslaught, indiscriminately pulled out all the underground metal pipes with a single wave of his hand, creating a commotion for those above. No one could ignore the threat beneath their feet and fire with ease. Some even became entangled in what were, inexplicably, gas pipes or other conduits. Even those who refused to give up and continued firing had their weapons stripped from their hands and bodies by Magneto, leaving them helpless in the ensuing battle. Those wielding plastic weapons were particularly vulnerable. The pipes emanating from the underground crawled over them like snakes, not only entangling them but also immobilizing them. This move also prevented Professor X from controlling his wheelchair. He could only continue his psychic battle with Selene. As an immortal witch and mutant, Selene was trapped in a period of magical decline, significantly reducing her abilities. However, Professor X's inability to free Nightcrawler from Selene's psychic influence hinted at her continued strength. Of course, this also had to do with Professor X's ruthless approach. Whenever he saw one of his own in danger, he'd simply stop the enemy. He was wasting too much energy on unnecessary things. The damaged ground certainly couldn't hinder Magneto's movements. He controlled the magnetic material on the soles of his shoes, allowing himself to levitate, heading towards the house where Jean was reportedly located. The Beast, having been sent flying, returned to the battlefield. He used the roofs of cars on the road as stepping stones, leaping forward. Cyclops was no American soldier, immobilized by traps. He flipped on his eye mask, lowered his head, and blasted himself in a circle, melting the wires that were entangled around him. He was about to flip on his eye mask and use a blast of vision to knock Magneto down from the air, but Beast lunged, interrupting Cyclops' attack. Furious, Cyclops didn't care who was in front of him. With a single blast of vision, he sent Beast flying. However, just as Cyclops was restrained, Magneto pulled a subway train from underground and blocked the entrance to Jean's apartment, preventing anyone from entering and interfering. He himself entered the apartment through the train's interior. Meanwhile, the Joker was showing off a box of sinister pizza sprinkled with pineapple slices, sipping his fat house drink. Seeing the classic scene from the movie, he clapped excitedly and cheered loudly. It was just that the unswallowed food in his mouth was spraying everywhere, making it look a bit messy. The Beast, blasted away by Cyclops, happened to fall next to the Joker. He stared blankly at this foreign player designated by Raven, and suddenly felt the absurdity of his purpose. Chapter 164 Crazy Battle. Why, you? Beast asked dumbfoundedly. Joker ate the pizza in his hand in one bite, sucking his fingers while saying, I don't know. Anyway, no one came to play with me, so I took the opportunity to eat something. It's okay to fill my stomach. Who told you that your airplane food is so bad? But you, Joker said righteously, I'm not wearing an X-Men uniform, and the Brotherhood doesn't have a uniform. Anyway, when you guys started fighting, I just crouched down and dodged bullets like an ordinary citizen, and those soldiers treated me like a dead civilian. What do you think I do in Hollywood? You probably don't know how familiar I am with this job. Soldiers beat people based on the threat, not the strange costumes. Besides, I'm not the only one who stayed to watch the show. Look around, there are so many people. Beast looked in the direction Joker pointed, and sure enough, there were many unrelated people hiding and watching the fun. Just look at your constant fuss. New Yorkers would have developed a big heart long ago. If it were 20 years later, there would be even more people filming with their phones just to get more viewers. Believe it or not, if it were Beast's human form, Hank McCoy, perhaps this tirade would have made Hank question his own life, or at least embarrassed and awkward. Beast's personality wasn't drastically different, but it was slightly different from his human form. He was much more decisive and direct. At least he didn't try to follow Clown's perverse logic. Instead, he said, I hope you've eaten enough. Then, with his large hand, he grabbed the green slicked back head and swung it at the American soldiers. Like a rolling log, he swept down two advancing soldiers in one go. Clown looked at the man he was pinning and said, if I say I didn't mean to do it, will you let me go? The soldier's logic for determining friend or foe was quite simple. Even without the initiative, Clown still knocked down two men without even trying to get up immediately. So, a soldier pointed his rifle at the Joker and shouted, don't move. Get out of there. Well, do you notice that those two orders are contradictory? Which one should I obey? The American soldier, already tense from facing the Brotherhood of Mutants, didn't let Joker's antics loosen him. He yelled hysterically, his finger on the trigger, ready to fire. But his mistake was getting too close to Joker, the muzzle of his rifle practically touching his opponent's head, and he didn't aim properly. Instead, he swung frantically. Without even demonstrating any super speed, Joker dodged the gunfire at the first opportunity. Then, grabbing the barrel, he effortlessly wrestled the rifle away. As the soldiers watched in amazement, Joker, holding the barrel upside down, swung like a club, knocking over the soldier whose rifle had been taken away. Looking at such a record, he stroked the upside-down rifle in his hand and said softly, "Ah, you see, I'm very smart. I know that the counterweight of the rifle is all in the back half, and the barrel is lighter. So it hurts more when I hit people with the butt of the gun. If it were upside down, the result would be different. If it hits someone, it may just not hurt. Oh, baby, since you use it so well, I will give you a name." The Joker looked at the rifle in his hand for a moment, and the battlefield became quiet, and entered a strange atmosphere. "Aha, I will name you Destruction." Feeling satisfied, Clown Jaw once again attacked with his rifle held upside down, knocking down one American soldier after another. The battle started instantly. In this kind of ultra-close-range melee combat, especially with Clown Jaw interspersed in the formation, rifles were completely useless. Whoever dared to shoot had to be prepared to hit his own people. For Clown Jaw, he only needed to move cleverly to make the soldiers afraid and not dare to shoot easily. Then he held Destruction upside down and knocked down the soldiers. Unfortunately, modern rifles are not used for this kind of thing. After hitting a few people, the whole gun fell apart. Even the barrel in his hand was bent into a strange angle. When Clown Jaw threw away the broken rifle, 3 or 5 soldiers were already unconscious on the ground. Several others were shaking their heads, trying to make their confused minds clearer. He picked up another rifle, and Clown Jaw also held it upside down. With the same gentle eyes and tone, he stroked the rifle and said, "Baby, I name you Destruction. I hope you can stay with me longer than in the first life. Come on, soldiers." In the street-to-street fighting, with countless vehicles serving as cover, the Joker didn't need to display any speed or strength, relying on what others considered unparalleled luck to weave through the hail of bullets and neatly knock down soldiers. In reality, every move he made was the product of meticulous calculation. But with the help of his super brain, it seemed like intuition, or a stroke of luck. But even more terrifying than a clown in outlandish attire constantly knocking down soldiers with his rifle was the maniacal, non-stop laughter. The soldiers had never experienced such combat. It seemed as if everyone could defeat this crazed clown with just a little effort, but there was always just that little bit short. Although no one was fatally wounded, at most unconscious, the laughter was like a taunt, filling them with fear. All this changed with the arrival of a squad of better-equipped assault infantry, specifically trained to combat mutants. They were equipped with electric shock paralysis guns, eliminating the risk of accidental injuries. Even if they shot their own men, their equipment could prevent them from being paralyzed by the shock. Such a group of soldiers surrounded the Clown Jaw. The rest of the soldiers who were not well equipped dragged their fallen companions away. The Destruction rifle in his hand was already the 5th or 6th generation, and Clown Jaw held it with both hands at his side like a baseball bat. He was originally scanning the American soldiers around him with a vigilant look. Suddenly, Clown Jaw put down his gun and used it as a crutch. His eyes widened, and with a lewd smile on his face, he started with a classic American joke, "Knock knock." Unfortunately, the soldiers didn't bite, and everyone fired at once. More than a dozen electric shock paralysis bullets all hit the Joker. And he also cooperated and pretended to be paralyzed by the electric shock. His whole body stiffened, and he fell to the ground and twitched. The reason for this cooperation was that he had noticed with his super senses that all the mutants of the X-Men and the Brotherhood had been knocked down. The soldiers also focused on capturing, not killing mutants directly. When the soldiers took props similar to those used to catch dogs and put the collar to control mutants on the neck of the Joker, the man pretending to be dead was looking forward to what would happen next. He was so excited that he almost revealed a flaw and whistled. Chapter 165 The Moving Train. "My children used to idolize you." A soldier's sarcasm startled the snoring clown super awake. He looked around and found himself chained to a specially designed prisoner seat with other mutants. Everyone looked as if they'd eaten shit, their faces grim, their hands cuffed behind their backs. The position was extremely uncomfortable and not ergonomic at all. But what really made everyone uncomfortable was the X-gene control device around their necks. This device effectively suppressed everyone's mutant abilities. Even Omega-level mutants, once collared, would behave like kittens. Judging from the vibrations of the movement, they were on a special railway train, and the military was preparing to transfer everyone to the mutant control center. To put it bluntly, it was a prison specifically for mutants. Hank McCoy, having returned to his human form, heard the snoring cease and glanced sideways at the awakened Joker. With a tone of resignation and anticipation, he said, "Finally awake. You're such a sleeper. I thought you were electrocuted. After all, you're the first person to take over a dozen paralysis bullets in one go. I'm still growing, so I need to eat and sleep well. Otherwise, what if I don't grow up? Will you be responsible?" Joker retorted directly. Hank whispered, "Well, I was wondering, does the X-gene suppression collar work on you, too? I'm so weak. I'm so sad." A certain clown spirit took over and shouted to the soldiers who had run to the front or back of the carriage to rest, "Hey, do you have any adult diapers? Please change them for me. The control collar you gave me is really effective. I feel like my bladder and anal sphincter are giving out. The contents are about to leak out. Yo, do you hear me?" All the mutants, including the soldiers in the same car, looked in the same direction with disgust. Only Nightcrawler said worriedly, "Does the suppression collar really have such an effect? Why do I feel something strange in my stomach?" Hank sighed and said, "Kurt, that's an illusion. You're fine." At the same time, Hank also knew that it seemed impossible to rely on this alien who should not be a mutant to take action. Revan, the helper you named, is really useless. Magneto, whose mental protection helmet had been broken into pieces, ignored the Joker's monkey show. Instead, he looked at his old friend and old rival with a playful expression and said, "Charles, I thought the US military was your ally. How come you have ended up like me?" Professor X said with a little annoyance. "Once we start a war in the city, isn't this the inevitable result? You alone can't cause such damage. So I warned you a long time ago that a fight between mutants will only be a lose-lose situation." You said that as if the US military has no responsibility at all. Or are we just going to surrender if they raise their guns? No matter the reason, Magneto said sarcastically. Professor X said dissatisfiedly, "It's because of your actions that this whole thing got so out of control that it became like this." Yes, Professor X, who is always right, how could he possibly do anything wrong? "Charles, your arrogance truly astounds me. Has the title of superhero intoxicated you, and you can't extricate yourself?" This time, the taunting didn't stir Professor X's emotions. Instead, he paused for a moment before reflecting on himself and saying, "I've certainly made many mistakes, but my desire to help Jean has never changed. I never considered handing him over to anyone, the military, you, or those aliens. His extraordinary strength was an accident. If I could have helped, I would have preferred not to have sent him on that space mission, or to have suffered it all in his place, but now we have another thing to worry about. I know the aliens' motives. That power destroyed their home planet, but that same power can also be used to transform a planet. Those aliens are targeting Earth. They will wipe out everyone on Earth and allow their civilization to revive here. Soldiers, you must believe my warning and inform your superiors. This matter is not over yet." "Enough." The leading sergeant slammed the butt of his rifle on the bracket on the train and shouted, "Stop talking about aliens. We didn't see any small brown monsters with big heads and small bodies from beginning to end. It's only you mutants who are causing trouble. This joke is not going away." But Professor X wanted to say that there was an alien on the train, but everyone chose to turn a blind eye. Professor X had to explain patiently, "In fact, the fireball we saw falling from the sky, I am sure that it was an alien landing. And the reason they didn't reveal themselves to us after gathering was because we were in the midst of an internal conflict. Their primary goal is to seize the power in Jean's body, and the alien who followed Jean almost deceived her into getting it, but was interrupted by Scott. So you don't have to worry about not seeing any evidence of aliens, because they were bound to seize the rest. What better place than this train passing through the suburbs, bound for the mutant control center?" "Stop your nonsense," the leading sergeant said angrily. "No one except troublemakers like you would dare to attack a military train. Even if they were given the guts, they wouldn't." He had barely finished speaking when several crashes erupted from above the train. This immediately aroused the nervousness of the soldiers inside. Everyone held their rifles level, but glanced furtively above the train, at the source of the initial crashes. The restrained mutants within were not only battle-hardened, but also possessed a level of combat sensitivity not comparable to that of the average American soldier. They all sensed the uncanny sense of impending danger. Cyclops then addressed the soldiers. "Untie us. We can stand on the same side. Shut up. Who knows if they're your mutant helpers, coming to take the prisoners," the leading sergeant said stubbornly. He then called into the intercom, "Report the mutant enemy situation." Suddenly, a burst of gunfire and the sound of clashing from an unknown source emanated from the rear car, suggesting a fierce battle. This only heightened the anxiety of the soldiers in the car containing the mutant prisoners. Intermittent voices echoed over the intercom. They're not what? Report, the leading sergeant asked nervously, while he and the other soldiers stared warily at the passage door connecting the front and rear cars with their weapons raised. The machine gunner in the rear cocked his bolt, ready to fire. Chapter 166, Fierce Battle on the Train. Though the roar of machine gun fire from the escorting helicopters rang incessantly outside the train compartment, what made them even more nervous and fearful was the fierce fighting in the rear compartment, followed by a sudden silence. Was this a victory? Or a defeat? A sudden, heavy blow left a fist mark on the train compartment's access door. Then a second, and a third. Well, it looked like the soldiers guarding the rear compartment had been defeated. Otherwise, they wouldn't have needed to pound on the door with their fists to open it. And a normal human's fist wouldn't have been able to create a ridged fist mark on the steel door. These were mutants trying to break the prisoners, right? The leading sergeant remained steadfast in his belief, refusing to release the dangerous X-Men and Brotherhood of Mutants members who were in the same compartment. All the soldiers silently flipped the safety on their rifles and placed their fingers on the triggers. When the steel access door finally broke, the entire panel collapsed, revealing a group of ordinary people in civilian clothes. They were neither the soldiers guarding the rear compartment nor mutants with distinctive features. Without a word, the soldiers opened fire. They used live ammunition, not even warning shots or the electric shock paralyzing rounds used for mutants. Ordinary rifle bullets rained down upon the enemy, stripping away the aliens' mimicry, revealing their original appearance. But they couldn't even repel them, let alone injure or kill them. Moreover, these minor wounds would quickly regenerate, as if they had never been injured. Only the large-caliber machine guns at the rear could be effective. The powerful kinetic energy of each machine gun bullet could penetrate the enemy, removing large chunks of tissue. With enough shots, even if the alien skin armor eventually returned to its original appearance, they could still kill them. But the Debari were no foolish fools. Unsurprisingly, the American soldiers were like rags, being tossed about by these immensely powerful and nearly invulnerable invaders. This was because the train aisles were narrow, and the initial wave of aliens, forced to engage in close combat, were unable to demonstrate their numerical superiority. With machine guns backing up the rear, the American forces would have collapsed without a single blow. But the machine gun's impressive power didn't last long. A downed soldier was flung like a sandbag by the aliens, crashing into the machine gunner's position and destroying their only effective weapon. Seeing the urgency of the situation, Cyclops and other mutants eager to fight shouted, "Let us go." It will be too late. The soldiers had a glimpse of the situation. First, the imprisoned mutants and the invaders couldn't be in the same group. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so indifferent, even hostile, to each other. If they were, the mutants who wanted to be released should seek the help of the invaders, not continue to beg the soldiers. Furthermore, the invaders didn't fight by deliberately avoiding the restrained and immobilized mutants. They certainly didn't seem to be searching for control switches. Their eyes were fixed on the carriage further ahead. The solitary confinement of Jean Grey, one of the X-Men. So, the soldier guarding the rear, untouched by the battle, made a decisive move and ran back to the end of the train car to the switch that controlled the mutants. The emergency situation only heightened his tension. Fortunately, he successfully used the key to unlock the switch and deactivated the X-gene suppression collars one by one. Just as the aliens reached him, all the X-gene suppression collars flashed from red to green, signaling that the strongest mutants had finally been freed. Cyclops, freed, acted swiftly, flicking the switch on his eye mask. A dark red blast of vision instantly struck down the last alien charging at the American soldier. Meanwhile, the mimic aliens, halfway through the train car, were caught in a frenzy of attack from both sides. Many were promptly struck down. This train car held the most powerful members of the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Mutants. With the exception of a few, Their combat prowess was undeniable, instantly turning the tide. But how could these few kittens be the only aliens that attacked the train? Not only did aliens continue to pour in from the rear carriage, but they also attacked the people inside the carriage from the skylight above and the sliding doors on both sides. The Black Hawk helicopter that was escorting outside had long been shot down by the aliens. And other reinforcements were still on the way. The aliens that were knocked down did not just lie down on the ground. As long as the injuries were not fatal, they could return to the battlefield with full energy, as if they were revived with full health. In addition, the biochemical mimicry armor designed by these aliens in accordance with their racial talents had powerful defenses that could not be penetrated by ordinary rifle bullets, and a strength bonus far exceeding that of humans, making them as difficult to deal with as Earth's super soldiers. Even the powerful combat power of the X-Men, combined with the Brotherhood of Mutants, could not overwhelm the enemy. Magneto looked at the difficult-to-expand environment inside the carriage and immediately gave the order, "Cyclops, Storm, and Red Lotus, the three of you go to the top of the carriage to defend and block the enemy's advance. Nightcrawler, you take the professor to the front carriage and find a way to wake up our sleeping beauty. Selene, Beast, you come with me to push the enemy back and cut off the connector after we reach the rear carriage." "Wait a minute," the soldier who removed the mutant restraint device shouted. "We still have companions in the rear carriage." Magneto replied mercilessly, "Don't worry, soldier, they are not the target. As long as they are not dead at the beginning, the chances of them being deliberately killed are small. You can try to find a way to save people yourself, we can't take care of others. You should also know who they are targeting. That's obviously the truth, but it makes people feel uncomfortable listening to it." However, in the battle, Magneto didn't have the time to care about the mood of an American soldier. He directly controlled the rifles and pistols scattered on the ground, formed a gun array in the space in front of him, and fired crazily at the aliens who entered the car later. The empty rifles directly launched a suicide attack and smashed into the enemy. In fact, the effect was not great, it just delayed the large-scale entry of aliens from this gap. Magneto's real killer move was pieces of iron sheets or iron bars, which were directly inserted into the aliens' bodies, causing real fatal injuries and kinetic energy to push the opponent away. The other mutants also took action according to Magneto's arrangements. First, Cyclops used a huge visual shock wave, which not only penetrated the position of the skylight, but also blew away the surrounding enemies. Duran relied on his whip-like hair to bring himself to the roof. Cyclops relied on Storm's help to float to the roof of the train. Chapter 167 The Slacker. The three men assigned to the open space were, of course, unable to fully utilize their abilities within the cramped train compartment. Furthermore, outside the train compartment, aliens constantly attempted to board the train, coming from the air, the mountains, and the forests flanking the tracks. Preventing these aliens from boarding the train was no easier than driving the enemies off. Nightcrawler's delivery of Professor X to the front carriage startled the soldiers guarding it. However, Professor X's explanation, coupled with Nightcrawler's return to the rear carriage to join the battle, reassured the soldiers of their current situation. The soldiers now understood that the strange noises outside the train compartment were most likely aliens attempting to break through the metal sheeting. Now, whenever they saw a hole in the metal sheeting, they fired a volley of bullets at that point. Selene's psychic abilities were severely limited against the aliens, whose consciousness differed greatly from that of humans, and even Professor X couldn't fully grasp their full potential upon first encounter. Selene's misdirection abilities were practically useless against the aliens, who primarily relied on melee combat. So he simply forgot to bother, relying solely on physical combat. He was arguably the one who had to endure the most. However, Beast observed the Joker, who, despite his restraints being removed, still feigned weakness while sitting in his seat. Without a word, he reached out, grasped the man's head, and tore him from the restraint chair. "Ouch, be gentle. Blood may flow, heads may break, but don't mess up my hair. Don't ruin my look. The aliens are coming, it's your turn," Beast said, intending to throw Joker into the crowd. However, Magneto was ahead, commanding his rifle with unleashing force, leaving no room for him to throw Joker. Unless he intended to throw him at one of his own people. Suddenly, the side door of the train carriage was violently flung open, revealing a larger hole. Some of the aliens, having not yet adopted human camouflage, attempted to enter in their original forms. Beast, struck by inspiration, grasped the back of the Joker's neck with one hand and the back of his head with the other, lifting him toward the enemy. The instant they met, a Kryptonian heat ray unleashed, cleaving the debris in two. Cyclops' attack essentially involved connecting his eyes to a special dimension, drawing unlimited energy from that dimension and releasing it in a targeted burst. This energy, imbued with immense kinetic energy, generated both impact and destructive power. In contrast, the Kryptonian heat ray was a different matter. Besides its kinetic energy, it also possessed a peaked, high temperature. Most enemies were effectively slain by the intense heat. Therefore, Cyclops' visual blast couldn't match its cutting efficiency. This was why, when Cyclops used his power, he mostly only blasted the debris away, unless some unfortunate individual chose to withstand it. However, the Kryptonian heat ray effectively sliced the debris in two. Faced with this unexpected attack, Beast, like a laser gun, repeatedly grasped the Joker's neck and fired in different directions. The lack of a trigger wasn't a big deal. The Beast rubbed the dog's head in his hand like a ball. Then a heat ray erupted. Enough, enough, aliens have human rights too, breaking free from the Beast's addicted hands. The Joker pulled out a comb from somewhere and smoothed over his messy green slicked back hair. He cursed, "Damn it! Is it that in your mental hierarchy of contempt, at the top are the Jews, descendants of the chosen heroes? Then the whites, the blacks, the coloreds, and finally the mutants, damn aliens, even below the mutants, that gives you the nerve to mess with my head and my hair, This is intolerable. I'm turning against them, helping them and fighting for the human rights of aliens." The Beast, revealing guilt, was about to explain something to the Joker, who had moved to the open side door of the carriage and was confronting the mutants. He saw another alien outside preparing to flip into the train carriage, and a pair of big feet kicked towards the back of the Kryptonian's head. This kick inexplicably kicked the Kryptonian's head, and kicked the comb that the Joker was using to comb his hair away. Looking at the comb that fell into pieces, the Joker shouted sadly, my poor Cleopatra, do you know that it has no air? What should I do with my hairstyle without it?" It is obvious that the guy who luckily kicked down the Kryptonian after entering the room has not learned the language of the Earth. He does not know that the Joker is sad and is strictly prohibited from interrupting his sad mood. He shouted as if in protest, thinking that this would intimidate the natives of the Earth. Unexpectedly, the Joker took a deep breath, and his chest swelled 2 or 3 times larger, and several buttons of his shirt broke. He turned his head and roared at the alien who entered the room. This sound was not a sound that human ears could receive. The air cannon, compressed to the extreme, combined with the effect of ultra-high-frequency vibration, smashed the alien who killed the comb to pieces. Even the aliens who wanted to follow the same route to invade the train compartment were affected by this air cannon. It shattered whatever it touched, leaving only the remains of the body falling into the compartment along the original momentum. The Joker shed 2 lines of tears, blurring his cross-star eye shadow, like 2 tears of blood. He gritted his teeth and said viciously, "The hatred for killing the comb is irreconcilable. You will pay for my Cleopatra." The Joker, who was ready to kill, picked up a rifle left by the American soldiers from the floor of the car and fired at the aliens fiercely. It can be said that his posture was perfect, but his lethality was close to zero. Magneto, who saw everything out of the corner of his eye, just wanted to say, "Are you serious?" Selene, who had temporarily escaped the fight thanks to the Joker's great power just now, said, "Why don't you put the gun down and just use your mouth?" Hearing this, the Joker was unhappy. He put down the gun, supported it like a crutch, and said, "Ask a man to use only his mouth. Do you know how insulting this is? It seems to say that except for my mouth, my whole body is useless. Is this guy making a dirty joke?" Selene looked at her boss in disbelief and asked. This time Magneto was impatient. He cursed, "If you don't want to fight, get out of the car." "Okay, got it." Just as Clown Zhao was about to jump out of the train, Beast grabbed him by the collar and lifted him back from midair. Clown Zhao said helplessly, "Brother, is this necessary? You're dragging me around like a kitten. I have my dignity to save." Beast was about to explain something. But unexpectedly, Clown Zhao, who was in his hand, took the blame for him. A plasma cannon hit Clown Zhao, exploding a ball of overflowing plasma. Chapter 168 Individual Flying Boat. The Joker helped Beast deflect a disaster. This, like a signal, caused the debris who had attacked the train to leap off. The 3 men fighting on the roof were still confused, and those inside were equally bewildered. Only Magneto, a veteran of battle, understood what was happening. He shouted, "Fire incoming! Close to me!" Selene immediately relayed Magneto's message to all the mutants and the surviving soldiers nearby. Even Cyclops and Storm, who had displayed their prowess on the roof, leaped back inside, their abilities making them defenseless. Engerin was the first to flee. Magneto gathered all the rifles, both unfired and unfired, and stacked them densely to form a wall of guns and shields. He then continuously tore at the nearby iron sheets to thicken the shield. The next moment, a barrage of plasma cannons blazed from the side of the train. The Debari's single-person assault craft, finally leveraging their superior technology turrets, bombarded the rear of the train from the air. To transport prisoners and prevent mutant hijacking, the train's armor had been reinforced. Yet, it remained vulnerable to the barrage of the Debari raiders. Even the shields Magneto managed to maintain proved ineffective against the plasma cannons. Constant reinforcements were necessary to compensate for the damage and maintain their effectiveness. The Joker, used as a human shield by the beasts, looked at Magneto helplessly and said, "Well, should I remind you? This is a high-temperature plasma cannon, a powerful force generated by the combined power of immense electrical energy. It has no physical form, but it can theoretically be deflected by magnetic fields." Magneto understood immediately and altered his defensive strategy. Instead of manipulating the metal intershield, he instead created a powerful, invisible magnetic field. Once the plasma cannon contacted the edge of Magneto's magnetic field, it would instantly accelerate but redirect the fire in a different direction. This approach undoubtedly saved considerable effort and eliminated the need for materials. It's fair to say that any other high-tech weapon employed by the Debaris wouldn't be so easily countered. But the plasma cannon happened to be Magneto's domain. With Magneto as their most powerful shield, and the combined efforts of the two sides in the previous battle to dismantle the ironwork, they now had a wide field of vision, with the exception of the largely intact train platform. Cyclops and Storm seized the opportunity and resumed their long-range shooting attack. However, facing the alien craft at night, their accuracy and effectiveness were limited. Joker, also hiding behind the magnetic shield, pulled out a lollipop he'd hidden somewhere and stuffed it directly into his mouth, mumbling something incoherently about low blood sugar, dizziness, and fatigue. Nightcrawler shouted in fear, "Haven't those aliens noticed their attacks are ineffective? Why haven't they retreated?" Though Beast had left his human form, his brilliant mind remained. He immediately understood the enemy's intentions and said, "We're pinned down. The plasma cannon can still be effective against the rest of the train. They're using their craft to bombard the train just to make sure Jean isn't in the back of the train. Whether they blew us up or cut us off from the train ahead, it would be a tactical success. So, Eric, we can't stay here. We have to advance and defend the car Jean is in. If we're cut off, it'll be nearly impossible to catch up." Magneto acted decisively with a single word: move. Everyone, including the surviving American soldiers, began to move. No one even bothered to open the doors between the trains. Cyclops simply blasted them open and they filed in. Every time they abandoned a car, it was destroyed by intense fire. It wasn't that the aliens were cooperating, but rather that the cars, without Magneto's magnetic shield, couldn't withstand the concentrated fire. The American soldiers gathering along the way were the most panicked. They were either supporting unconscious comrades or clutching completely useless rifles, seeking reassurance. Whether the enemy was mutants or aliens was pointless at that moment. If they couldn't tell, they'd wasted their eyes and brains. As the group entered a relatively intact carriage, the alien attack seemed to have ended only in the previous car. In the darkness, on a speeding train, most people couldn't see any sign of the ceasefire alien craft and assumed they had left. But the Joker could clearly see over a dozen shuttle-shaped, fully enclosed craft flying alongside the train. Their design was completely different from the flying motorcycles used by the invading Chitauri during the Battle of New York. Perhaps because of their relatively small size, their weaponry was limited, which is why they used plasma cannons throughout. The reason they stopped attacking was simple: everyone had retreated to the carriage near Jean Grey. Perhaps the aliens couldn't guarantee their accuracy, like a scalpel, leaving Jean alone and only sending the others flying. Of course, the cessation of the alien craft's attack didn't mean their actions had ceased. It simply meant that another wave of attacks was brewing. Everyone understood this and began to prepare. A soldier opened the passage door, and the next car was indeed where Jean Grey was being held. Aside from Professor X, there were only a few soldiers left to help defend the train. The moment the door opened, They were startled, nearly losing their focus to a barrage of bullets. The car they were in was specifically for weapons. Nearly 100 loaded guns were neatly arranged in the gun cabinets on both sides. Mutants and soldiers, not adept at close combat, were equipped with firearms. Unfortunately, the weapons on the train were primarily designed for mutants and were not powerful enough to fight aliens, but there was no better choice. There were 2 heavy machine guns, with ammunition boxes hanging off the side. However, these weren't meant for individual use. Without a stand, few could properly fire them. Therefore, the only 2 effective weapons remained on the weapon racks. Seeing that everyone was almost ready, Magneto instructed, "All of you go to the next car and help defend it. Have Charles speed up and wake up Jean. Then find a way to leave." Everyone obeyed and entered the last car to be defended. However, Magneto grabbed the Joker, who was hiding in the crowd and about to sneak into another car with him, and said to him, "You will stay here with me." Chapter 169, Duel with Wu-Kei. After several hints from Beast, Magneto knew how to use him. Simply throw him wherever he saw a crowd, and the clown would naturally throw his enemies into chaos. If he stayed around, it would be his own people who would be in chaos. The reason he hadn't gotten angry before was probably the good luck of that lollipop in his mouth. God bless the lollipop. The Joker didn't protest at being forced to stay. He simply spat out a lollipop and, with a magical gesture, fiddled with it in front of Magneto, muttering, "You can't see me, you can't see me," before stealthily inching towards another car. Magneto didn't bother to waste time with him and simply clenched his fist. Under his control, several sheets of iron sealed the single door, completely separating the 2 cars. Seeing his way blocked, the sulking Joker put his hands in his pockets, hunched his shoulders, and duck-stepped to the heavy machine gun. He began figuring out how to attach the ammunition belt box to the machine gun, then load, chamber, and fire. This was the only toy in the train car that interested him. He'd used pistols and rifles, but not a heavy machine gun, so he'd take this opportunity to try some new things. Magneto then used his powers to instantly control all the remaining firearms, forming a formation. Even the remaining heavy machine gun was commandeered by Magneto's powers. This spectacle made the Joker want to rant. We all know rifle ammunition is useless, so why keep so many? What's the point? Why not figure out how to propel bullets electromagnetically and create a Gauss rifle with a powerful force? With enough muzzle velocity, it could still hurt the debris. This shows that this version of Magneto isn't very good at science, more of a tinkerer and action-oriented man. While his mutant powers are masterful, their expanded uses are a bit monotonous. He's not quite as powerful as he'd later lift the Golden Gate Bridge. Still, it feels like a return to the roots of all swords. Hundreds of rifles were tightly packed together, with pistols filling the gaps above, below, and to the sides. Any normal person would have been terrified. Unfortunately, the enemy wasn't a normal person, but an alien, one that had absorbed some of the Phoenix Force. The debris leader, Vuko, flew towards the train from their own personal flying vehicle. In a swooping dive, Vuko leaped forward, precisely passing through the passageway and landing in the heavily defended carriage of Magneto and the Joker. Upon landing, he was greeted by a passionate volley of bullets from Magneto, even firing at close range. The heavy machine gun roared with a gust of wind, unleashing its 12.7x99 ammunition into the alien's body. Had the enemy been any of the ordinary aliens from earlier, this welcome display would have ripped through dozens. However, Magneto recognized the alien disguised as a woman. It was the one who had accompanied Jean. Based on what Professor X had said, this person must be the alien leader. Right or wrong, useful or not, kill them first. However, Vuko, having absorbed some of the Phoenix Force, was no match for rifles or machine guns. The barrage of bullets merely chipped away at his camouflage. He marched forward, unfazed, under the hail of bullets. All the rifles quickly emptied their magazines. Only the machine gun, with its ammunition belt case attached, held up somewhat, but its firepower couldn't sustain for long. Although Magneto coordinated his attacks with cutting and piercing iron sheets and bars, they proved ineffective. He glanced at the Joker, who was still fiddling with the ammunition belt, unable to even load it, and shouted, "Boy, you better be serious. The enemy is on your way." Frustrated, the Joker simply threw his hands aside, giving up. He picked up the open ammunition belt case and smashed it. Even the heavy machine gun met the same fate, striking the alien leader Vuko in the face. Such an action, of course, would do no harm. The outcome will be the same as yours, so why bother firing? The Joker spread his hands and said, why bother shooting? Under Magneto's surprise, you're dead, gaze, the Joker picked up an empty rifle. Holding it with the same unarmed hand, with the same smell, he caressed the barrel of the rifle obscenely and said, I'm still used to doing this, destroying, well, N+1 generations. With that, he swung the rifle like a firewood stick, preparing to smash the butt into Vuko's face. But as if he were offering his face, Vuko, who was close, launched a powerful punch, sending him flying. The Joker flew backwards out of the train compartment, faintly shouting, you have no martial ethics. I use weapons, and you use fists. Well, a comrade who has of no help at all. Magneto felt a surge of resentment. He should let that absent woman see the true character of the helper he had specifically requested. Magneto, having expended all his ammunition, was left with bullet casings strewn across the floor like a carpet. He reverted to his primitive methods, tearing apart the iron sheets of the train car, creating countless sharp spikes that swirled like a vortex, intent on strangling the aliens walking within. But just before the spikes reached him, all his attacks were blocked, preventing him from advancing an inch. He had experienced this disparity in power before with Jean. This wasn't just a battle of telekinesis and magnetism, but a power of a higher order, crushing everything beneath it. He could only struggle to hold on. Finally, Vuko waved his hand, sending Magneto flying against the wall, knocking him unconscious. Even the metal objects controlled by the magnetism fell heavily, piling onto Magneto's body. The path to the final car was now clear. With a single thought, Vuko launched the iron sheets and blocks blocking the passageway, including the door itself, towards the other side of the car, knocking down many unfortunate individuals. Everyone watched with awe as the female alien, who had passed through the carriage guarded by Magneto and the Joker, charged towards them. Her face was devoid of any human expression, a cold, icy expression. It was as if she wore a mask, unable to laugh or cry. Wu Kei spoke for the first time, addressing the humans present, hand over the girl, and I'll spare your lives. Or at least not now. If that were all he had said, and the aliens' true intentions unknown, some might have harbored a glimmer of hope. But Wu Kei had already blocked his path, forcing the humans, mutants and American soldiers alike, to fight to the bitter end. A fierce battle erupted instantly. Under the cover of the American soldiers' barrage of bullets, the mutants surged to the forefront. Perhaps due to their sheer numbers, Wu Kei couldn't control them all at once. He could only dispatch and repel them one by one, until no one could stand before him. And all this happened in a matter of breaths. Fortunately, Wu Kei hadn't yet mastered the Phoenix Force, otherwise he wouldn't have had to go through so much trouble. Thanks to Kyan Lumalulu for the reward. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 170 Phoenix Girl Awakens. The exchange of minds is like the Eastern idiom a dream of a yellow millet. What may seem fleeting to outsiders may have replayed itself thousands of times within the mind. It's said that sincerity touches all hearts. Professor X, opening his heart, finally made Jean Grey appreciate his good intentions. She understood the whole story, and even understood the purpose the alien leader had casually revealed when his powers were drained and he fell unconscious. Especially the last one. He wouldn't mind giving up powers that didn't belong to him to help the homeless aliens rebuild their home. But the price couldn't be Earth, not the place where he grew up, and not all the lives on Earth in exchange for a new home for the aliens. So he had to resist, as Jean Grey, an X-Men. Awakening from her slumber of survival, Jean Grey opened her eyes. Although the other mutants had been liberated, the device suppressing his X-gene had never ceased. However, the power he now wielded wasn't solely derived from the X-gene. Therefore, the limiter had no effect, and he was simply reduced to ash. Jean Grey controlled her body to float into the air, gazing down at everyone with a godlike presence. Her expression was blank, save for her eyes, which held a resolute, piercing gaze. Vuko, looking at the now awakened Jean, simply said, "You promised to transfer all your power to me." "Yes, I did, before I knew your intentions. But why do you think I would agree to such a thing when you threatened to destroy the Earth? Then I'll have to take it myself. The outcome won't be any different, Vuko said coldly, as if stating a matter of fact. The clash between two vessels of the Phoenix Force was a trivial matter for them, but to the outside world, it was a monumental event. No one knew how much of the Phoenix Force Vuko absorbed, or whether distributing it proportionally made any sense. The fact was, however, that Vuko, the leader of the Debari, had indeed gained some additional abilities through the Phoenix Force. But they were nothing compared to Jean Grey, who, having just awakened, had begun to influence reality. Under Jean's influence, the moving train derailed. Spinning through the air like a pretzel, the ripped iron sheet stretched out like tentacles, piercing the patrolling Debari craft. Vuko, trapped within it, was similarly twisted like a rag, his entire body contorted and deformed. Only the mutants and human soldiers were protected, encased in a foam-like bubble, shielded from the swirling outside world. All craft within a certain range were destroyed, leaving no one unharmed. Even those Debaris who strayed too close and attempted to rejoin the train were pierced by the extended iron tentacles, succumbing. Only Vuko, twisted into a pretzel, survived. Remaining conscious, he contacted a mothership in low Earth orbit. The Debari warship burst through the atmosphere, reaching the battle site. Immediately, a single anti-ship gunfire blast, with a radius of several hundred meters, not only destroyed the train but also left severe scorch marks in the area. The train was merely rotten, not completely vaporized, thanks to Jean's power. The same was true for those he protected, all remaining safe and sound within that seemingly impenetrable bubble. But withstanding the starship's barrage was no easy task, especially for Jean, who was unfamiliar with harnessing the power within her. Despite shielding everyone, the crowd was inevitably scattered by the blow, shattering even the protective barrier they had erected. The bushes ignited by the cannon's energy and the blazing wreckage of the train provided illumination for the mutants and American soldiers at night. Debelavu soldiers converged from all directions, and single-person aircraft were released from the airships, laying siege to the remaining humans. Their mission was simple: kill everyone present, or at least contain them. This would allow their leader to confront their target alone and capture the full cosmic ray energy. Facing the full force of an entire warship, both the mutants and the American soldiers were in imminent danger. They were just a bunch of struggling infantry, low on ammunition. Even with ammunition, they wouldn't be enough to withstand the more technologically advanced Debari weapons, especially given their combined air-to-ground attack. The mutants' ability to remain immortal while fending off the attack was truly exceptional. American soldiers, skilled at dealing with mutants, were now merely a burden, needing protection. Vuko, restored to his original form, still in his human form, approached Jean Grey. Jean, a master of telekinesis, played a crucial role in the humanity's ability to hold out. Even his original form wouldn't have been enough to cover the entire situation, but the Phoenix Force within him was simply too potent. Jean needed to become accustomed to using this power, becoming more refined. If he exerted too much, not only would he not be able to defend the humans from both air and ground attacks, but humanity itself would be affected, wiping it from reality. Therefore, Jean Grey had to restrain her efforts to protect them, which was why others were still injured. Vuko was here to disrupt this balance. Just as the Debaris conquer the universe, those who cherish their companions inevitably become driven to despair by their deaths and injuries. A flaw in their psyche becomes an opportunity to seize power. So, Vuko remained unhurried, steadily pressing the preoccupied Jean Grey, putting pressure on her. The Debaris held both the military and tactical advantages. Vuko believed they could resolve the situation before reinforcements from the planet's natives arrived. The psychic power amplified by the Phoenix Force allowed him to calculate what would happen next and seek the most advantageous course of action. But he had overlooked a being, one that no one in the universe could comprehend, one that not even the three ancient powers or the immortal Phoenix had ever encountered. A Kryptonian star illuminated by a yellow sun, a psychopath. The Joker reappeared, carrying a radio on his shoulder, blasting Queen's famous triple-time tune, "We Will Rock You." He approached with a flamboyant gait, adhering to a strict stomp, stomp, clap rhythm, seemingly slow but actually fast. As a man who should have his own soundtrack, Joker finally figured out what was wrong with him, the lack of a powerful entrance theme. So, he made a special trip to a nearby town, borrowed this radio, and even found a suitable cassette tape to play. Listening to the music, he couldn't help but sigh. As expected, watching a live movie is immersive, but without the thrilling soundtrack to go with it. No wonder I can't get excited. Music is essential, With the help of the battle song, he could almost feel his buffer rising, ready to punch Phoenix to death. Chapter 171. I've wanted to do this for a long time. Of course, Wu Kei wouldn't allow anyone to interfere with his ability to seize the target's power. Without further orders, the acting commander on the battleship ordered the removal of those in the way. The Dibari wouldn't resort to naval gunfire against a single human target. Furthermore, the human was too close to the target and their leader, making it easy for the guns to cause accidental damage. Therefore, the order to expel the interfering individuals was quickly dispatched to the air group. 2 single-person airships approached Joker Zhao in parallel, their plasma cannons firing at a higher rate of speed. Just as flies and mosquitoes can't cause serious harm to humans, they're annoying nonetheless. Immersed in his own music, Joker Zhao was naturally impatient with 2 fighter planes buzzing around him, using him as a target for random shots. So, in a fit of rage, his super brain instantly calculated a precise angle, and his radio launched like a cannonball, striking the single-person airship slightly ahead at a perfect angle. Even without knowing the mechanical structure and layout of these alien airships, applying enough force would still cause them to move. So the flying craft slammed into its companion, flying alongside and slightly behind it. The alien single-person craft, lacking any significant collision protection, exploded into a fireball mid-air, achieving a 2-birds-with-1-stone victory. The Joker struck a victory pose. Just as he was about to dance with joy, he suddenly realized something. The background music had stopped. "Where's my radio?" Suddenly remembering the radio he'd just thrown, Clown Zhao cried out with a mournful face, "I promised to return it. What if it's broken?" But then he suddenly stopped crying and muttered to himself, "But I never promised anyone in person, so let's just pretend it never happened. Caught the thief with the stolen goods, caught in bed with an adulterer. Now I don't have the stolen goods, so I'm not a thief. This is legal." Then, like a deflated balloon, he said listlessly, "But there's no background music, it's like all the buffers are gone. I'm done, I want to go home." Little did he know that things in the world aren't always as we wish. Clown Zhao's one-man show was over, and he wanted to bow off the stage, but that didn't mean others would let him go. He planned to deal with the troublemakers first, then slowly create a target with cosmic ray energy. Wu Kei turned and looked at the man, who looked unlike any other native, and said, "I remember you. I punched you before, but I didn't expect you'd survive. I'll pay you back for now, with interest. I'll ask for it back someday." Clown Zhao waved his hand and went home to sleep. But Wu Kei, unsportsmanlike, delivered a powerful kick from behind, aiming for the spine in his waist. A normal person would have been paralyzed, if not ripped in half, killed instantly. But Clown Zhao was merely sent flying, slamming into the nearby bushes. The clown, standing up, braced against a few weeds, wore a smile that obscured his expression. But his hands tucked into his waist, his chest rising and falling, and his gaze down, all suggested anger. The Debiri, of course, couldn't read human emotions, let alone body language. Wu Kei simply stared at his chosen opponent with indifference, wondering why his blow hadn't killed him. Even his own people, fully equipped, wouldn't have been able to protect against the kick he'd just struck. While his newfound abilities from absorbing cosmic rays hadn't been fully developed, Wu Kei was well aware of the magnitude of the enhancements. And judging by the natives he'd encountered before, they were even more vulnerable than his own people. So, what was so special about this native? Wu Kei pondered. After being kicked and landing face first, the Joker approached with a dignified air, pointing at Wu Kei's nose and declaring, "I'm a complete gender equality advocate, don't push me." After 2 unsuccessful attempts, Wu Kei decided to change his approach. Because he hadn't yet mastered the energy he'd absorbed, he'd previously used it to strengthen himself, sometimes supplemented with telekinetic ranged attacks. It wasn't that he couldn't, like Jean Grey, influence the existence of reality simply by being awake. It was simply a manifestation of overflowing power, a loss of control. It wasn't impossible for Wu Kei to do the same, but it would take time and effort to master it. Why waste energy against those weaker enemies when a more energy-saving method could be used? But now that he's faced a foe that simple methods can't defeat, upgrading his tactics is a reasonable option. He rubbed his hands in mid-air, experimenting with how to use that energy to influence reality. He didn't need to be too meticulous, as long as the destructive effect was sufficient. Feeling he had mastered the technique, Wu Kei thrust his hand forward, intending to erase. Where was the person? Suddenly, The clown Zhao appeared from behind Wu Kei, shouting, "Look at me, the gender equality fist." The next moment, an infinitely magnified fist filled Wu Kei's entire field of vision. The Divari leader, struck so hard by the blow, felt his head nearly fly off, his neck stretched to its limit, barely holding it together. The blow sent Wu Kei's eyes swirling with stars. Never mind whether he'd experienced anything like this since his cosmic ray enhancement. Even before the enhancement, during his cosmic battles, he'd never been struck by a punch with such an effect. His consciousness, nearly fading, was instantly recaptured as his arm was grabbed. Refocusing his gaze on the man before him, Wu Kei's mind froze for a moment, unsure how to react. Joker said, "It seems my support for gender equality isn't strong enough. So, is this enough?" Another fierce punch. And this time, Joker didn't hold back. With repeated "Is it enough?" questions, each blow to Wu Kei's head grew in force. Powered by the Phoenix Force, Wu Kei's injuries were instantly healed. However, this excessive use of power came at the cost of his mental strength. The part of him that belonged to the Tiberi was gradually replaced by the Phoenix. The urge to survive and the growing fear that gripped his heart left no one to predict what would ultimately become of him. This manifested itself externally, as Wu Kei's body began to radiate uncontrolled energy, like flames floating on his skin. "Oh, fire!" Joker saw this and immediately dropped him, leaving him limp on the ground. He quickly unzipped his pants, took out the faucet, and said, "It's important to put out the fire. Watch me pee on you." I've wanted to do this for a long time, thanks to D9 Pants for the reward. Chapter 172 Showdown. The scene stunned everyone. The only sound was the playful laughter of the Joker, who had released the water. But his elation was short-lived, as Joker witnessed the Phoenix Force's reality-warping properties. He saw the water he had released return to its source, pouring back into his bladder. This strange experience made him leap up and down, exclaiming, "Oh, my God! Oh, my God! Are they trying to exploit me, awaken some strange XP?" After returning all the items to their rightful owners, Wu Kei, acting on instinct, delivered a direct, annihilating punch. Joker twisted around, leaning back on his hips to absorb the blow, while collecting his gun and zipping up his zipper. Wiping the sweat from his forehead and flicking it aside, Joker said, "Phew, that was a close call." A warning to all authors: Kryptonian urine isn't salty enough to extinguish the Phoenix flames. So, no need to try again. Wu Kei, standing again, looked nothing like his previous cold demeanor, resembling Jean's previous state, teetering on the edge of instability and control. He floated up, head lowered, muttering something indistinct. Even with Kryptonian superhearing, only vague words like "I've become dirty" could be heard. These words weren't spoken in English or any other language familiar to him, they were a kind of understanding that reached a cognitive level. Joker was about to make a few more jokes, but this time, his field of vision was filled with an infinitely magnified fist. Vuko's punch didn't land as he intended. Joker spun with lightning speed. His right fist, following the momentum, struck Vuko's fist in the face, and the two engaged in a fist-to-fist exchange. Joker, grounded, sank several inches, but he managed to withstand Vuko's blow and was unable to knock him away. While the Kryptonian was no match for him in strength, his influence in the real dimension was no match. The right arm that had struck him emanated ash, as if it were about to be erased from reality. Equality fist, the Joker launched a left hook, sending Wu Kei flying again. However, his left arm suffered the same fate as his right. He quickly retreated to Jean Grey's side, hands raised to his chest, and asked, "Girl, do you have any idea how to resolve this situation?" Drawing upon the power of a shared destiny, Jean Grey simply waved her hands, instantly freeing the Joker's arms from danger. Seeing this, Clown Zhao exclaimed, "Excellent. I now appoint you as my full-time nurse, responsible for controlling the situation and replenishing my health. I'll be responsible for beating him up. This division of labor is no problem, right?" Without waiting for Qin's response, Clown Zhao swung his arms in circles and said, Come on. The fact that you're still so energetic tells me I haven't done enough in my pursuit of perfect gender equality. This time, enjoy the realization that I've given it my all." Qin, a woman, looked quizzical and asked, "Is this gender equality? Why not? I can beat up a man, and I can beat up a woman. Isn't that unequal?" Clown Zhao turned his head and spoke his perverse logic, but Wu Kei punched him in the cheek. He fell back, and with a wood-like kick, He delivered a powerful kick to the back of Wu Kei's head, sending him flying. Then, with a sudden somersault, he stood up and said, "Of course, the same applies to kicking people, girl, get on with it," Clown Zhao commanded Qin. At the same time, they excitedly shouted, "Come on. Let's have a fun threesome." Jean didn't have the chance to refuse or retort. The Joker, unleashing super speed similar to Quicksilver's, engaged Vuko in a tug-of-war. But in reality, it was more like the Joker's one-sided beating of a punching bag. And Vuko was like a ping-pong ball. Before he could send Vuko flying far enough to destroy a mountain or plow a deep furrow in the ground, the Joker, catching up at super speed, would slam him back in the opposite direction. The damage accumulated in this back and forth, yet remained confined to a small area. Because of this, outsiders couldn't imagine the magnitude of the turmoil unfolding in this circle, where only after images could be seen. Only the revived Jean Grey understood clearly that this was a battle of another level, one where the laws of physics were becoming a mockery of reality. This was evident from the fact that he didn't even dare to join in, engaging in a true 2-on-1 fight. If it weren't for the fact that the moment his fists made contact with the opponent, their physical existence would be affected, the Joker's speed and power alone would easily have crushed Vuko. So, while Jean aided other mutants and US soldiers in fending off attacks from the air and land, she also had to manage the ever-destroying Joker. With all his non-physical abilities completely suppressed by Jean Grey, who possessed the same power, Vuko was no match for the Joker. He was arguably the most tragic Phoenix host in history. However, this chaotic, immortal force, born from the primordial universe, at the very beginning of all things, while symbolizing the emotions of life, possessed no emotion itself. It simply amplified the emotions of its host, whether good or evil, joy or sorrow. It also reflected the hearts of others. It could be said that the Phoenix was as powerful in the hearts of those who revered and longed for it as it was in reality. But the Joker had no such thoughts, or rather, he had all of them, but no single focus. Right now, he simply wanted to blast the head off, and he did. Witness his punch through Vuko's face. A fatal injury of this magnitude made Vuko, regardless of whether others believed he was still alive, even the immature Phoenix host felt he was dead, and then he died. The emanating Phoenix force returned to the form the X-Men had witnessed in outer space a few days earlier. A massive energy ball, resembling a solar flare, emanated from Vuko's body. Had Jean Grey, the Phoenix host, not been present, the Phoenix force would have likely consumed everything in its path, human and alien alike. Then, the entire Earth. After wiping out all life and silencing the planet, the Phoenix force would have moved on to other parts of the universe, seeking the next trigger, just as it had done before. But Jean Grey was present. Almost instinctively, she absorbed the Phoenix force emanating from Vuko. Or rather, this part of the force eagerly returned. The two merged once again, forming a whole. The returning Phoenix carried with it a portion of Vuko's knowledge. This helped Jean better understand the energy within her, allowing her to control it with greater ease. Wings of flame flared behind him, instantly engulfing most of the debris and their alien aircraft. The tide of battle shifted dramatically. Concern for the presence of other Earthlings prevented him from exerting his full force, otherwise, the debris aircraft would have been completely swept away and incinerated. But the true threat loomed tens of thousands of meters above. Even after noticing the death of their leader and the heavy losses suffered by soldiers and aircraft on the surface, the debris warships refused to give up on seizing the target's energy. The aliens aboard the warships decided to resort to more drastic measures. The warship's main guns began charging, their muzzles aligned. A crushing air-to-ground strike was the true symbol of the superiority of a superior civilization over lesser ones. After all, that energy ball couldn't be destroyed, they'd clear the area first. Many of the mutants present were highly sensitive to energy fluctuations, not to mention the sheer size of a Starship-class main gun. While the warship in the air had previously used its cannons, the energy now concentrated was far greater than what had previously been demonstrated. Could they possibly possess the power to destroy a planet with a single shot, as seen in sci-fi movies? No one dared to bet on whether these aliens possessed such technology, but most were powerless. Only Jean Grey floated into the air, attempting to cast a shield to block the incoming fire from the battleship's main guns. But before she could deploy her shield, she was grabbed by the collar and hurtled towards the battleship. The Joker laughed heartily. "Why are you trying to block it, girl? Have you ever heard the saying that the best defense is attack?" What? Jean Grey, dazed, was carried high into the sky. "Look at my Phoenix cannon." With a simple spin, the Joker used a hammer-tossing motion to fling the Phoenix girl forward, sending her careening through the muzzle of the main gun, poised to fire, into the heart of the battleship. "It's showtime." He then aimed his heat ray at another muzzle, firing a counterattack on the battleship's main gun, and then crashed into it. Chapter 173 The Battle Suit Above. Somewhere on the French coast, a rocky shore not considered a resort, barely dawned, naturally devoid of passers-by or tourists. Henry emerged from the sea, his face soaked with water, the ink and hastily painted hair washed clean by the salt water, leaving his former appearance completely unchanged. He spun around to dry himself, then removed his outrageous costume, shoes and all, leaving only his bright red shorts. Henry gazed at the suit in his hands with a gloomy expression, feeling a surge of frustration. He recalled the final battle aboard the alien warship. It wasn't the aliens who were chasing him, but a mad phoenix. They'd been running, one chasing, running into a wall, forcing their way through. While the ship was defended by an alien force, those weaklings were no match for the Kryptonians and the enraged phoenix. It was a relief if they hadn't caught up, but if they had, the two invaders would have ended badly. In short, the Debari battleship fled, dragging its shattered hull. Earth was too dangerous, and the remnants of the defeated army decided to seek other ways to continue their race. Henry only remembered his thoughts at the time, to avoid Phoenix and to avoid the now unknown level of satellite telemetry technology, so he plunged into the sea. He remembered that even 20 or 30 years later, with the continuous advancement of satellite technology and analysis, there were still certain blind spots in deep-sea life detection. Basically, beyond a depth of 20 meters, optical monitoring methods were completely useless, and only radio waves could be used to cross-map the fixed topography of the seabed. This was why, in this world, the underwater people and kingdoms that inhabited the seabed remained only legends, unconfirmed or traced. So Henry decisively chose to advance through the seabed, returning from America to the European continent. Why Phoenix didn't pursue him, Henry had no idea, but he probably had his own plans. Whether to destroy the world or Earth was up to him. The X-Men would handle any major troubles, and Henry's help would only go so far as to drive off the aliens. Beat the Phoenix. Stop messing around. His previous state was just naive. Looking at the suit in his hands, Henry, sitting on a rock in his boxers, felt a sense of unease. Finally, he couldn't help but curse, "Fuck, this suit is too damn good. I can't wear it anymore." Resolved, Henry used his heat rays to incinerate the cheap costume shop outfit, including the tap shoes, reducing it to ash. Then, with a powerful breath, he blew the ashes into the sea. He couldn't answer the X-Men's calls again. He was going to beat the Phoenix this time, and if he pulled something out the next time, he'd be in tears. But once he was down to his boxers, Henry realized something. If he flew like this, would the wind pressure blow his pants off? Then there really was a bird flying in the sky. So, superheroes wearing tights and capes and flying through the sky actually do seem to be, in a way, quite consistent with physics. With the exception of Power Girl in her Casey suit. And then there's the Flash's suit, which is incredibly unscientific. Every Flash reboot takes a moment to explain that at extreme speeds, ordinary clothing would tear from wind pressure or burn from high-speed friction, hence the need for a specialized suit. But when the story progresses, the Flash seems to never consider this issue when carrying ordinary people at high speeds. No matter how far or how fast they run, they'll be carried out the same way they were taken, leaving the Flash feeling dizzy and nauseous at best. If there were still a practical need for a suit, wouldn't a Flash carrying an ordinary person at high speed start out fully clothed and arrive naked? Forget it, it's the Speed Force. It's the same idea as when Superman's physics doesn't make sense, and his bionic field comes into play. So, is there any way to save these pants and run back to Switzerland, to the room I borrowed from Miss Hepburn? Or maybe just fly back to my rental in Los Angeles? If my pants died heroically along the way, I'd be left running naked. Sure, if I ran fast enough, no one would see. But this artistic act in broad daylight was truly thrilling. Henry patted his head, seeming to be so immersed in the role he couldn't quite shake it off. As expected, one should be careful with the costume and the roles they choose. Choosing a lousy, money-making role would ruin their career. Similarly, wearing the wrong costume would shatter their heroic dreams. Oh, that's not right. I never dreamed of becoming a superhero. What did it matter if it was torn or not? The point was why I chose that costume. I was so obsessed. I was crazy to do that. Oh, that's not right either. It was the way I acted in that costume that was crazy. Or was it that I, the person who chose to wear that costume, was actually crazy too? Regardless, Henry firmly believed he was an ordinary person, simply possessing a physique reminiscent of a Kryptonian. Yes, whether he was Kryptonian or not remains uncertain. But it seemed like that was alright. For one thing, Henry had also recently found a block of pure lead to test his identity as a Darthan. Pure lead, unlike kryptonite, doesn't glow, which means kryptonite emits radiation, while pure lead doesn't. Therefore, Darthans wouldn't be affected by kryptonite like Kryptonians on Earth. Darthans would only develop allergic reactions from contact with pure lead. Henry wouldn't be allergic to lead, so he wasn't a Darthan. A Homelander template was even less likely, as he wasn't an alien being and didn't have a bionic field. Unlike Henry's situation, this was ruled out. As for whether there were other aliens in the Marvel Universe who had become powerful due to the exposure to Earth's yellow sun, Henry couldn't guarantee it. After all, when discussing origins, it's important when it matters, but not so much when it doesn't. Fortunately, that inexplicable bionic field helped Henry keep his red shorts. Just like the Hulk's transformation, those super stretchy pants always managed to preserve his last shred of dignity. This was a miracle of the Marvel Universe. Even Thanos, with those 6 Infinity Stones in hand, couldn't snap his fingers and transform the Hulk's underpants. Otherwise, this would go from an all-ages book to an 18-plus pornographic magazine. So, should he collect all the Infinity Stones in this universe and try to make a wish, to see if the power of the 6 Infinity Stones was greater than the Hulk's underpants authority? Henry slapped his head hard again, trying to shake off those perverse thoughts. Then, using his super speed and ability to teleport, he returned to his room and changed into normal clothes. Retired people always wake up early. So, when Henry came downstairs, Audrey Hepburn was in the kitchen, wearing an apron, frying eggs. Hearing footsteps, he turned back. The woman smiled cheerfully and greeted, "Good morning, son. I didn't hear you come back. Would you like breakfast?" Chapter 174, A Retirement Life That Is Not Leisurely. Rue de la Paix, Paris, France, 2nd arrondissement. This quaint street is one of the world's most fashionable shopping streets. The street embodies the casual, relaxed French lifestyle. Garbage is swept aside, and stylish women stroll along. But if you get closer and smell it, you'll notice a strong scent of perfume, overshadowed by a faint stench. If asked, both men and women will claim the stench comes from the garbage on the ground. No one will admit it's their own body odor. These contrasting scenes, all in one place, embody the uniquely French romantic freedom. It's a scene that leaves a lasting impression on anyone who visits. In a street-side cafe, 2 elderly men, seemingly in the prime but already in semi-retirement, are playing chess. Such a leisurely scene is not uncommon in this fashion capital, and naturally, no one bothers to disturb them. Ordinarily, today, on a scorching day, a burly man, also wearing a black coat, plopped down in a seat next to the 2 men playing chess. He was a large white man with dark brown hair and pale temples. His angular face revealed a toughness and sophistication, and anyone could tell at a glance that this man was not to be trifled with. But the most striking feature was the eye patch he had covered his left eye with. He looked just like the pirates who roamed the seas over 100 years ago. The 2 old men playing chess were not welcoming such an uninvited guest. But they didn't chase him away, allowing the waiter to serve him and bring him a cup of black coffee. "You should try the café au lait here, at least it's not that bad," said the bald old man in the wheelchair. The one-eyed burly man said, "It's nothing, it's not the main character." Another old man with short hair, a thin face, and a weathered look said, "Are you here to arrest me? I didn't realize you controlled France, the Strategic Hazard Intervention and Espionage Logistics Directorate, that is under the UN Security Council. We have jurisdiction worldwide." "Oh, then please produce the arrest warrant, read it out, and then cuff me." "But I can't guarantee what will happen." The hairy old man grinned, a sly grin. He really didn't mind a little commotion when his elegant chess game with an old friend was interrupted. The one-eyed burly man ignored the conversation. He took a step back and said, "I'm only here to ask questions, not to arrest anyone." "At least you don't think I'd come alone to arrest you." "No comment. Ask 2 people, 2 answers." The 2 friends exchanged a glance, then said, "I won't tell you anyway. I don't necessarily have an answer." One was speaking harshly, the other softly, but the outcome seemed the same. However, the one-eyed burly man had foreseen this and asked nonchalantly, "Where's Jean Grey?" "I don't know," the bald man in the wheelchair replied bluntly. "You all changed the name of that school to Jean Grey School for gifted youngsters in his honor. You're not trying to tell me you've given up on him and are done with him, are you?" the bald man in the wheelchair said. The name change was a joint decision made by the current principal, Raven, and the others. "I'm retired, so I don't care. Besides, even if they still care about him, what's the point of finding him? Handing him over to the government for trial? If the White House still wants to command the X-Men, have them restore the hotline and contact the people at base. You won't get anywhere coming to me." The one-eyed burly man said, "You know we don't mean that. Come on, Nick Fury. Do you really need to say something you don't mean in front of me? I don't even need to read your mind to know you're talking nonsense. Yes, you could have promised me something without lying. But you don't represent your entire organization, do you?" "I won't tolerate any hidden threats," Nick Fury stated with unwavering conviction. "I want a pardon. A pardon signed by the president, with the formal force of law, agreeing to forgive Jean for what happened," Professor Charles Xavier demanded. "The White House agreed to your request in exchange for the alien warship." "You didn't do it," Charles said dissatisfiedly. "On the battlefield, the wreckage of those alien spacecraft was recovered by the U.S. military, and the X-Men didn't keep any. But why do you think we could leave an alien warship without support? Where did the U.S. military go? We couldn't wait for a fighter jet to arrive for dozens of minutes? Go back and ask the soldiers who were there and see if a group of infantrymen could have captured a warship. We're just mutants, not gods. In any case, without a pardon, I'd rather Jean hide and protect herself. If he wanted to keep him under his watch, you and I both knew it. The Mutant Control Center was a prison, and so were the X-Men. At least I can choose how he lives his life, instead of being confined as a guinea pig in a lab or wasting his life in prison." Actually, if Nick Fury used his resources, it wasn't impossible to find Jean Grey. But the key was how to apprehend her. Having Charles Xavier, who is like a father to her, persuade her was the easiest way. As for using force, as a mutant capable of carrying a space battleship, Nick Fury couldn't imagine how he could subdue her. Even mobilizing the Howling Commandos wouldn't necessarily be effective. But negotiations always work like that. Start with an unacceptable price, but after you've compromised, the second offer becomes more palatable. So, Nick Fury asked, "What about the other person, the Joker? Who is he? Where is he?" Magneto, Eric Lenscher, who had remained silent until then, couldn't help but speak up. He said with disgust, "That guy's a lunatic. Like a grenade with a pin pulled and the safety handle popped open. You know it's going to explode, so you just have to throw it as far away as possible before you get killed. Believe me, you don't want to keep him. Of course, I don't mind that grenade going off in some strategic logistics hellhole. I'd even like it. But you don't think we care about his whereabouts? Look in the mental hospital, they're everywhere." Nick Fury pulled out a photo, placed it on the table, and asked, "Is that the Joker?" The person in the photo was River Phoenix, a talented Hollywood actor and the youngest winner of the Venice Film Festival. Puzzled by the intelligence chief's photo, Charles asked, "How did you come to that conclusion?" "Based on the limited surveillance footage, my analysis team reconstructed the Joker's appearance based on the outlines, ignoring the ink on his face." "Is that him?" No one had imagined that this Kryptonian could manipulate his facial muscles to adjust his features. So the reconstructed face was just someone else's face. However, Professor X had seen his original appearance, so he never thought that the face under makeup was actually a different one. For some reason, Professor X decided to keep the secret for the young man. On the one hand, the X-Men were not obligated to share intelligence with the U.S. government, not to mention that the fight with Magneto this time was simply assisted by the U.S. military. Besides, when the U.S. government intervenes, it is always easy to push a good person to extremes. So he shook his head and said, "I don't know." "Please check it yourself," Nick Fury asked. "Then why would he help you? Maybe he is just a passing messenger of justice," Charles evaded. And Eric even praised from the side, "Huh. Let me say, no one can predict the behavior of a mentally ill person, right?" Chapter 175 The End of Vacation. "Henry, can you take me to the library?" Mrs. Hepburn opened the window and called out to Henry, who was still tidying the flower bed. "Okay, I'll be right there." Kicking the dog's butt, Henry brushed off the dirt and headed back inside. He wondered how much of the dirt on him came from the Jack Russell Terrier. Well, there were 5, so Henry might have kicked the wrong one. But he didn't care. Sooner or later, these 5 dogs would have to rearrange the order of the household. As he reached the door, Robert opened it and walked out. He was dressed in light sportswear, his leash dangling from his hand. The sight of the leash ignited the Jack Russell Terrier's excitement. All 5 dogs ran to Robert's feet, circling and sniffing, as if they were about to wag their tails. Seeing this, Henry asked, "Robert, are you going out for a jog? I'm taking the bus to town. Do you want me to bring you anything?" "No thanks." Robert patted his slightly protruding belly and complained, "Every time you're in the kitchen, you make me eat too much. If I don't exercise more, I'm afraid I'll be so fat I can't get out of bed, but every time you come back from a workout, you always say you're hungry, and then you eat an extra bowl of rice. Do you think your weight gain is actually due to exercise?" Henry said jokingly. "Ah, you kid. You're the murderer, and you're trying to shift the blame onto someone else," Robert protested as he tied the dog leash. Once the leash was fastened, he not only patted his cheeks to cheer himself up, but the dogs also ran to the front, tightening the leash. With all 5 dogs pulling, Robert had to run. Robert turned around and said, "I'll be back before dinner. Remember to make something delicious." With that, he ran off. Henry yelled from behind, "Dude, you're fat, you're really not my fault." The cheerful and optimistic old actor raised his middle finger and ran off without looking back. Audrey Hepburn, who was just getting ready to go out, also walked into the hallway and met Henry's gaze. He looked at the person running away and asked, "Is Robert out for exercise?" "Yes, boss." "Please wait a moment. I'll get the keys, pack my things, and drive back. No rush. Be careful." "Okay." Henry went up to the attic, his room, and packed several stacks of books in paper bags. He had borrowed them from the town library using the woman's library card. They were all French and German books, different from the English books he had read in Los Angeles, and they were quite inspiring to Henry. However, the collection in the small town library tended to be literary. If there was a good thing, it had books from various countries in their own languages. He put the paper bag of books directly on the passenger seat of the car, drove to the front door, and got out to help carry the books from Ms. Hepburn. Though they were supposed to be moving, they were only a few books, completely disproportionate to Henry's reading load. So, seeing the paper bag of books on the passenger seat, ready to be returned, Audrey Hepburn exclaimed, "You've finished all those books? You're really quick." She opened the back door and carefully placed her hands on the upper edge. Henry smiled and said, "I'm a fast reader. And these aren't literary masterpieces, just treat them like storybooks." "That's very disrespectful to the authors," Ms. Hepburn said chastisingly. "I understand. If I ever get to meet them in person, I'll definitely apologize sincerely," Henry said, seemingly humbly but perfunctorily. Honestly, it was a habit he'd developed from reading online articles. Audrey Hepburn, as if sensing Henry's lazy nature, simply complained, "You kid," and left it at that. He remembered something else and asked, "Has the UN contacted us?" Henry, driving, replied, "The UNICEF people have already started planning the event. However, the civil wars in various parts of Africa have been raging this year, and many places require peacekeeping troops to accompany us. Although South America and Asia are much safer, we've only just visited many of these places. Going there again in the short term wouldn't be very effective, so they're having trouble arranging the itinerary. Do you have any plans for where to go? You should have a general idea, right? Maybe you really don't." "So they said they wanted to ask your opinion." "To ask for my opinion?" Audrey Hepburn asked, slightly surprised. Taking advantage of the brief stop, Henry pulled a sheaf of documents from his briefcase on the passenger seat and handed it to Ms. Hepburn in the back seat. "Actually, I was planning to report to you over tea, but since you've asked, I'll just share. I compiled this information last night. It covers your involvement with UNICEF since 1988, and UNICEF's aid efforts over the past decade. Starting on page 3 is the stability status of various countries, a rough assessment based on data provided by the UN and news from newspapers and magazines. Following that is each country's need for assistance from human rights organizations, simply put, the state of poverty in that country. Finally, it discusses whether they have requested an invitation from the UN. In addition to the textual descriptions, Henry also hand-drew maps of Africa, South Asia, Central America, and South America, encompassing most of the world's poorest countries. He used colored pencils to mark different countries with varying degrees of clarity, making them easy to identify at a glance. The skill behind this presentation was undoubtedly honed in a previous life. The prototype of PowerPoint software was created in 1987 and acquired by Microsoft in 1990. However, it wasn't as ubiquitous as it would become a decade or two later. It had relatively few users and its functionality was somewhat limited. So, Henry simply hand drew, creating the layout he desired. At my current speed, drawing is much faster than using a computer to typeset and then trying to output it to paper. Ms. Hepburn was accustomed to Henry's reports, which tended to use graphic presentations whenever possible. This made them easier to understand and compare than simple text. Furthermore, because the maps in several reports were drawn in the same location, Audrey Hepburn overlapped them and held them up to the sunlight from the car window. Suddenly, she spotted a dark, largely unmarked area in the African landscape. It was south of Ethiopia, north of Kenya, and west of Somalia. Pointing at the empty space, Audrey Hepburn asked curiously, "What is this place?" Henry took a moment to glance and replied, "That's Wakanda, a poor, backward, agricultural country. It's still a monarchy, and the current king is T'Chaka. While it doesn't have diplomatic relations with any other country, it is a member of the United Nations." This was information provided by the United Nations. Henry wasn't making any assumptions or fabrications based on his memory. Ms. Hepburn asked, "So, can we go here?" "Wakanda," Henry replied bluntly, "probably not. Wakanda doesn't accept any support from human rights organizations or have established any human rights protection agencies within its borders, so we have no reason to visit. On the other hand, they've never invited us, so we can't just be uninvited guests. But you could try to request a visit to Wakanda through UNICEF. But I'm not sure they'd agree." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.